A heavy cleaver tossed in the dark. One reluctant slice to draw blood. The lethal contract sealed in crimson. Blinding magic erupts from the parchment. That confident smirk in the face of danger. Armed thugs bursting through the door. Suddenly a blinding blur of motion. 3 devastating strikes landing at the exact same time, leaving 3 bodies on the floor before they even realize what hit them. But to see how our boy turned into an absolute menace, we have to rewind to the exact movement when it all started. Sunlight pours into a lavish estate, setting the stage for a celebration that most kids could only dream of. A massive feast is laid out across the table, complete with roasted meats and lit candles to mark a major milestone. 10-year-old Isaac von Goethe sits at the head of the table, showered with praise for scoring a recommendation to the Royal Academy at such a crazy young age. A brown-haired maid affectionately serves up a massive platter of all his favorite foods to mark the occasion. Our boy flashes a polite smile and thanks his nanny, looking every bit the picture-perfect young noble. Suddenly, a brown-haired servant steps up from behind, catching the kid off guard with a massive wrapped gift box. The man insists he take it, pouring his heart out about how the young master's medicine literally saved his sick son's life. Deeply touched by the gesture, our hero graciously accepts the present, thanking Hans for the heartfelt gift. But the wholesome moment is suddenly cut short by the rapid patter of eager footsteps echoing into the room. A young blonde boy bursts onto the scene, wielding a massive lute and hyping himself up to perform a celebratory track. Isaac immediately recognizes his little brother, Jonas, a kid whose musical talent is so cracked that even the royal court musicians call him a prodigy. Beaming with pride, our guy happily urges his little bro to show off his skills. The kid hits him with an enthusiastic nod, absolutely buzzing with excitement. Closing his eyes, Jonas gently strums the first chord, letting a peaceful melody wash over the imagined dining hall. But the peaceful vision instantly shatters into a blood-curdling nightmare, a pale hand clawing at the strings as agonizing screams echo through his mind. The illusion snaps as the adult Isaac violently gasps awake, his face drenched in a cold sweat. Our guy sits up in his dim, stone-walled confinement cell, desperately trying to catch his breath. Wiping his face, he lets out a self-deprecating chuckle, quietly mocking his own foolishness for letting a dream rattle him. Our guy knows deep down that he can never return to those golden days. The heavy wooden door suddenly creaks open, and a dark-haired servant steps inside carrying a lantern and his morning meal. The servant pauses mid-step, catching sight of the young master's rattled state. It's Lucas who steps up with genuine concern and asks if our boy just suffered through another nightmare. Rubbing his temples, Isaac wearily admits his mind was stuck in the past. 20 years ago, to be exact. Lucas sets the tray down on the table, gently offering him some fresh cheese to pull him away from those musty old memories. Trying to keep things normal, he casually reminds his master about the sword training he completely bailed on yesterday. But Isaac's mind is already drifting right back to that fateful timeline, when he was 10 years old and just a month away from entering the Royal Academy. He remembers it clearly. It started with a sudden, severe flu that kept him bedridden for 3 agonizing months, finally forcing his father, Count Goethe, to call in a scholar from the magic tower. The hooded scholar sat down with the Count to deliver a grim diagnosis. He explained that while every living being is born with an innate mana vessel, our boy's internal mana circulation was unfathomably fast and violently unstable. The scholar warned the devastated father that before long, the young boy's vessel was going to shatter completely. And the nightmare they tried to pray away became a devastating reality, as the magic burst from his small frame like a broken dam. Young Isaac cried out in pure agony as the raw energy erupted from his core. The uncontrolled explosion violently blasted the adults and the heavy furniture straight across the bedroom. From that day on, the shockwaves became a terrifying, unpredictable curse, leaving a gruesome trail of blood and casualties throughout the estate. But the absolute breaking point came when a sudden eruption tore apart his own younger brother's hand. Horrified beyond words by the monster he was becoming, our hero begged his father to lock him away. He accepted a tragic fate of total isolation, weeping alone in the dark. He pleaded to be locked away in a place where no one could ever reach him, and where his cursed power couldn't hurt another soul. The memory fades. Back in the present, our boy calmly chews on stale bread in his dingy cell while reflecting on that tragic 10-year-old version of himself. His brooding session gets cut short when a sudden wet hack echoes from right outside his door. He glances over to find Lucas leaning heavily against the stone doorframe, looking like he's barely clinging to life. Thick dark blood drips from the servant's mouth, staining his hand and splashing onto the cold floor. The realization hits our hero like a freight train. He immediately recognizes the fatal, late-stage symptoms of severe mana poisoning. Rushing over to physically prop the ailing man up, Isaac is eaten alive by guilt, knowing this is the brutal price Lucas is paying for staying by his side. But Lucas just wipes the blood away and tries to laugh the whole thing off, weakly joking that if he leaves, Isaac will be completely alone. Leaning back against the cold wall, the fiercely loyal servant does his best to reassure his panicking young master. Flashing a warm smile, Lucas points out that despite tanking dozens of point-blank magic explosions over the years, he hasn't lost a single hair on his head. Isaac isn't having any of the banter, dead seriously warning his servant that a single slip-up around his chaotic aura will cost him his life. Desperate to protect his only servant, Isaac turns his back and coldly orders Lucas to leave so he can meditate in peace. Lucas just closes his eyes, keeping that warm smile plastered on his face as he accepts the dismissal. He calls it an absolute pleasure to serve, and with that, the heavy wooden door clicks shut, leaving his master completely alone. But the silence doesn't last. Our boy's eyes blow wide open as a jarring, twisted congratulation suddenly echoes in his head. He remembers it clearly. Violently pulled into a traumatic nightmare, he sat stiffly at a formal dining table. The room was an absolute slaughterhouse, with lifeless bodies and creeping thorny branches littering a blood-soaked banquet. An ominous voice welcomed him from behind, sending a paralyzing chill straight down his spine. His eye twitched in sheer, unadulterated terror at the sight. Looking down the length of the massacred table, he spotted a lone figure standing amidst the absolute carnage. It was Lucas, his face half covered in gore, smiling menacingly as he casually greeted his young master. The memory fades. Back in the present, our hero snaps out of the horrifying memory in a cold sweat. Curled up in the dark, he recounts the grim reality of what actually happened. Lucas died shortly after that final visit. On the day Count Gerda delivered the devastating news, another massive mana explosion rocked the cell, prompting our guy to lock his door for good and completely isolate himself from the world. Staring blankly at the ceiling, Isaac is absolutely consumed by regret, wishing he had just kept his distance. He pulls the heavy covers completely over his head, deciding he should have stayed cold to keep himself from getting attached. Behind closed eyes, a bittersweet vision flashes in his mind. An alternate reality, where they could have all just smiled together as a family. But reality doesn't care about what-ifs, and the years bleed away in total isolation, marked only by the depressing piles of stale bread tossed at his door. Time takes its brutal toll, and a wrinkled aged hand reaches out to pick up a crust. Our boy has withered into an old man, his hair bone white and his face lined with decades of solitude, yet he forces himself to keep chewing and keep surviving. Using a jagged stone to carve endless tally marks into the wall, he watches his youth completely slip away into the dark. For over 40 years our guy has devoted every waking moment to studying magic, desperately searching for a cure to his broken body, until there were literally no books left to read. With external knowledge totally exhausted, he turns inward, crossing his legs and relying purely on intuition and deep meditation. Several more agonizing years pass before another piece of bread drops through the hatch. Inspecting the moldy food, the old man wonders if the Gerda family is facing financial ruin out there in the real world. Brushing off the concern, he returns to his desk, meticulously working with glowing blue crystals and complex runes to finally crack his condition. A sudden shift in his bright blue eye breaks his decades of intense focus. Staring at the massive wall of tally marks, our hero realizes with a heavy heart that he has officially hit 71 years of age. Then, the heavy thud of a booted foot shatters the absolute silence outside his wooden door. The old man looks up, completely startled, as a frail, aged voice calls out to him from the corridor. The unseen visitor identifies himself as Jonas, checking if his long-lost brother is awake. Bewildered by the impossible visit, our boy slowly rises and approaches the heavy wood, asking what could possibly bring him here after all this time. He physically flinches when Jonas asks for permission to finally step inside the cell. Gripping the stone wall with trembling fingers, Isaac flat-out refuses, ordering his brother to speak from the hallway. The two old men slump to the floor, separated by a thick barrier of stone, as Jonas asks how he's been holding up. Letting out a heavy sigh from the shadows, Jonas reveals the grim reason for his visit. Today is the anniversary of Count Gerda's death. Isaac's gaze sharpens with sudden intensity as he demands to know exactly how their father passed away. Leaning against the cold stone, Jonas warns that it's a tragic, drawn-out story, asking if his brother is truly willing to listen. With a sad, shadowed chuckle, Jonas decides to start his tale from the events of 30 years ago. He recounts the brutal succession war between the first and second princes that completely tore the kingdom apart. Our hero listens in absolute silence as the tragic history unfolds. Hours pass in the dark, and Isaac finally speaks up, admitting that his brother has a real talent for storytelling. Jonas jokes that he should have dodged the noble life entirely and lived as a wandering poet. But the bittersweet mood shatters when Jonas casually mentions it would have been hard, since he can only use one hand, causing Isaac to flinch in sharp guilt. A heavy silence falls through the stone before our boy quietly apologizes. Gripping his badly scarred hands, Jonas builds up the courage to speak about the rest of their family. He delivers a crushing blow, confessing that their parents and Jonas himself hated Isaac so much. But as a vision of their youth flashes before our boy's eyes, Jonas adds that they also missed him terribly. Through all the deep-seated hatred and pain, Jonas admits that they truly very much loved him. Breaking into a weak, wet cough, the old man laments that he won't even get to see his brother's face one last time. Alarm bells ring in our hero's head at those ominous words, especially as Jonas reveals that a mysterious gate tore open during the war. Slumped against the heavy wood, Jonas gasps out a desperate warning about otherworldly monsters and a radical religion, using his final breaths to wish his brother a comfortable life. With a ragged sigh, the dying man whispers that he just needed a little more time. A thick pool of blood seeps beneath the doorframe as Jonas completely collapses, his final regret being that he didn't come sooner. Throwing the heavy door wide open, Isaac's eyes widen in absolute horror. Jonas lies dead on the cold stone floor, brutally impaled by a massive sword. Staring at the bloody blade, the devastating realization claws at the old man. The sheer, agonizing willpower it must have taken for his brother to speak for so long with a fatal wound. Refusing to leave his family to rot in the dark, Isaac gently lifts the lifeless body into his arms. He begins the grueling climb up the dark stone staircase, carrying the physical and emotional weight of his family's tragedy. Tears stream down his wrinkled face as he grits his teeth, silently begging the heavens to tell him why this had to happen. A fresh wave of sorrow hits as he feels how terrifyingly light Jonas is, weeping over just how much his brother must have starved. Step by agonizing step, he carries his brother toward the blinding light at the top of the stairs. After 60 agonizing years in the dark, our hero's boot finally crosses the threshold of his prison. But the world he steps into is a literal apocalyptic nightmare, the grand estate reduced to rubble and littered with the massive rotting corpses of giant monsters. Our guy carries his brother's frail body past the bloody carcass of a colossal wolf beast, taking in the sheer devastation of whatever war happened while he was locked away. He reaches out a trembling, wrinkled hand, catching a single snowflake drifting down from the pale winter sky. Looking up with a weary, hollow gaze, Isaac whispers to Jonas that the frozen earth is just too hard to give him a proper burial right now. He promises to wait until the spring thaw to lay him in the family cemetery, deciding that once his brother is in the ground, he'll finally let himself rest too. The harsh months eventually give way, and a delicate white butterfly landing on a budding branch signals that spring has finally arrived. Our old man stands in the lush green cemetery before two plots, a closed grave for Jonas and a freshly dug open one waiting for himself. Reaching into his heavy robes, he pulls out the glowing blue crystal he spent decades agonizing over. With a quiet sense of absolute finality, he grips the artifact tightly. Then, raising his empty right palm, Isaac effortlessly conjures a bright burning flame into the world. A bittersweet smile cracks across his weathered face as he looks up, asking his dead brother if he finally saw him use magic. Staring into the flickering light, he whispers that he finally pulled it off, even if it's decades too late. The cursed blue crystal shatters in his grip, the ultimate proof that he finally conquered his special constitution. And with a heavy sigh, he asks the empty air if it's okay for him to rest now. His frail body gives out, collapsing face down into the dirt as a gentle rain begins to wash over the forest. Lying motionless in the wet grass, our hero uses his final breath to ask if he might be forgiven, just a little bit. He remembers it clearly. A tragic vision of a ruined, sunlit hall flashed across his fading mind, filling him with bitter regret over the time he surrendered to despair. He wondered if he had just hurried a little bit more, could he have saved his home? With those lingering thoughts slipping away, the old man closes his eyes and peacefully passes on. But suddenly a hazy, dream-like voice echoes through his mind, asking if he had a bad dream. A voice belonging to Hans, a man who died a lifetime ago. The sharp sound of curtains tearing open shatters the void, flooding the space with blinding sunlight. And Isaac violently gasps for air, jolting awake in the middle of a lavish bed. Hans glances over his shoulder, calmly noting that the kid is drenched in a cold sweat. The servant walks over with a heavy limp to ask the young master if he slept poorly. Our guy sits frozen in the sheets, his mind racing as he wonders if this is just a cruel dream or the final hallucination of a dying man. Without warning, he kicks the covers off and bolts across the room, rushing right past the startled Hans. He slams his hands against the window pane, drawn by a panicked maid shouting from the courtyard below. His bright blue eyes widen to their absolute limits as a painfully familiar, cheerful voice rings out. Sitting high up in a tree holding a toy soldier and smiling brighter than the sun is Jonas. Pale and trembling, our hero breathes out the boy's name in utter disbelief. Sweating profusely, he mutters to himself that this is no illusion. Staring out at the golden days he thought were lost forever, Isaac realizes the impossible truth. He has returned to the past. Meanwhile, down the hall, the estate's maids are busy sweeping up the shattered debris from our hero's latest magical outburst. They whisper nervously among themselves, absolutely terrified of when his unstable constitution is going to trigger another disaster. Listening from the shadows, Hans furiously prepares to storm out and give the gossiping staff a piece of his mind. But before the loyal servant can even take a step, a pale hand grabs a fistful of his shirt to hold him back. Isaac steps out of the darkness, quietly admitting that the terrified staff aren't actually wrong. He tells Hans to stop coming to his room entirely, pointing out that the guy caught a stray injury today just by standing too close. Instead of taking the out, Hans drops straight to his knees. He assures the young master that his loyalty hasn't wavered, insisting that this dangerous temper is nothing more than a difficult phase. Our boy just listens in heavy silence, the guilt already eating at him. He remembers it clearly. In his past life, Hans always carried that exact same bright, unwavering smile. Right up until the loyal servant lost his life to one of Isaac's uncontrollable mana explosions, leaving nothing behind but a blood-stained floor. Back in the present, a crushing wave of guilt washes over our hero as the dark realization claws at him. His own broken body killed the only people who truly cared. He watched his brother Jonas playing in a tree, an innocent moment from his original childhood. Real or not, our boy knows exactly what he has to do. Hans looks up attentively the second his name is called. Turning his back to the loyal servant, Isaac coldly orders him to get out. He raises his voice, aggressively demanding that the man disappear from his sight immediately. Instead of arguing, Hans calmly accepts the harsh dismissal without a single word of protest. Clenching his fist against the window frame, our guy tells himself this is the only way to keep his servant safe. But as Hans limps out the door, he gently asks the young master not to shoulder the burden all on his own. The heavy door clicks shut, leaving Isaac standing in absolute suffocating silence. He stares down at his trembling hand, realizing he has zero memory of Hans ever saying those words in his past life. Desperate to know if this is just some cruel, twisted dream, he winds up and slaps himself hard across the face. The stinging pain radiates through his cheek, leaving our hero in utter shock that this impossible reality is actually happening. But there was one question in his mind: how did he die in his previous life? Watching his little brother Jonas playing outside, our boy decides the exact cause doesn't matter anymore. Clenching his fist, our boy vows to rewrite history and never let another catastrophic mana explosion tear his life apart. In his mind's eye, he pictures the legendary Zeke von Goethe, a mythic 10th-class mage who stood at the absolute pinnacle of power. That man was his great-great-grandfather. While living in the underground cell in his previous life, he learns about him from the ancestral records. Isaac spent decades trapped in that underground cell, obsessively studying those ancestral records to find a cure. Now, sitting comfortably at his desk, our guy stares down at the glowing blue runestone he'd just finished crafting. By carving a highly specific, math-heavy magical pattern into a raw mana stone, he's successfully recreated the ultimate cheat code for his survival. Resting his chin in his hand, the young master marvels at how incredibly nice it feels to do precision crafting with a 12-year-old body that doesn't shake with arthritis. He visualizes the body's mana vessel as a sturdy circular stone wall, keeping a calm pool of water perfectly contained. But that peaceful water violently erupts, completely shattering the stone barrier because his mana flows with such insane, uncontrollable pressure. While a normal mage would instantly drop dead from the blowback, the vision shows the broken stones magically reassembling themselves. The miraculous, agonizing loop of his cursed existence. Sketching out a quick diagram, our guy notes that this endless loop of exploding and healing is a total disaster waiting to happen. He slaps the blue runestone down onto the paper, explaining that the artifact's actual job is to intentionally damage his mana pathways. Drawing a new line branching off the circle, he breaks down how applying a continuous controlled impact to that specific spot forces a brand new pathway to open up, acting like a pressure valve to safely disperse the shock of his violent energy. The only catch is that the success rate on this technique is absolute garbage, considering he only barely pulled it off right before his previous death. A tiny flickering flame dancing over his bandaged hand was the ultimate proof that his theory actually worked in his previous life. Isaac swallows his nerves and prepares to beta test this highly dangerous method on his 12-year-old hardware. He focuses his energy, and a bright, vibrant flame successfully ignites right in the palm of his hand. But a split second later, that little spark goes totally out of control, erupting into a massive roaring pillar of fire that lights up the entire room. The young master marvels at the sheer, unbridled power for exactly 1 second before a sharp, agonizing shock hits his chest. In his mind's eye, he visualizes his internal mana pathways glowing a blinding blue, the delicate system literally cracking and overloading under the immense strain. Desperate to avoid blowing himself up all over again, our guy snatches the glowing blue runestone and thrusts it straight toward the roaring flames. The gamble pays off, and the artifact instantly splits the raging inferno into 3 perfectly stable streams of mana. Our boy looks up in absolute awe, realizing he just unlocked the ability to triple-wield entirely different spells at the exact same time. But before he gets too caught up in the hype, he clenches his fist to snuff out the flames, reminding himself to stay on target. Being an overpowered multicaster is cool and all, but his actual objective here is to stop himself from turning into a human pipe bomb. To permanently fix his shattered vessel, 3 pathways just aren't going to cut it. He's going to have to spam magic 24/7 to carve out even more roots. Gripping the glowing stone in the shadows, our guy makes a solemn vow to go full lone wolf, refusing to let anyone get caught in the crossfire of his volatile training. As night falls over the Grand Goethe estate, he steels his resolve to walk this dangerous path completely alone, which lasts for all of 5 seconds before Hans cheerfully bursts through the door with a dinner tray, completely ruining the edgy mood. Isaac glares daggers at the servant, flatly reminding the guy that he was literally just ordered to get out and stay out. But Hans completely ignores the death glare, shoving a piece of bread in the young master's face and nagging him about skipping meals. Our hero is utterly baffled by this dude's aggressively wholesome aura and stubborn refusal to take a hint. Defeated, Isaac stares into the crackling fireplace and asks Hans exactly how old he is right now, confirming he's currently sitting at a grand total of 12 years old. Hearing the number 12 out loud, our boy sighs and finally takes a bite, figuring he might as well play the part of a growing kid. The familiar taste of the wheat bread instantly hits him with a wave of nostalgia, bringing back warm memories of his nanny. Beside him, Hans watches with a relieved, heartwarming smile now that the young master is actually putting food in his stomach. Swallowing his bite, Isaac asks where his nanny is today, prompting the servant to reveal that her son Hinder has come down with a severe case of pneumonia. Tapping his fingers against the desk, our hero asks if she went back to her village to care for the boy. Our boy points out that any other noble family would fire a servant on the spot for abandoning her post, how well their household's unusual leniency. But the young master's expression quickly darkens, and he leans forward to ask if Hinder is the only one suffering from the illness. The servant shakes his head, delivering the grim reality that every single child in the village has caught the deadly sickness. Staring out at the crescent moon hanging in the night sky, a chilling realization claws at Isaac as he connects the date to a specific point in history. In his previous life, during the Black Goose Village mass pneumonia incident, his nanny tragically lost her only son to the outbreak. She carried that crushing, hollow grief with her for years, right up until the day she died. Bleeding out on a ruined red carpet in his arms, smiling as she whispered how glad she was to finally be leaving first. Back in the present, determined not to let her suffer that fate again, our boy racks his brain for the true, hidden cause behind the deadly plague. His eyes go wide as the pieces suddenly click together, and he calls out to Hans. Slamming both hands onto his desk, Isaac urgently demands to know exactly what kind of monsters were recently subjugated near the village. Because the clock to save her son is officially ticking. With the clock officially ticking to save the nanny's son, our boy wastes no time heading out under the quiet crescent moon. Deep in the frozen woods, a lone deer is just trying to enjoy the peaceful vibes. Until a massive blazing fireball suddenly erupts right in its face. The poor thing scrambles away in absolute terror, leaving Isaac standing awkwardly in the snow with his shovel, realizing he might have overreacted just a tad. Keeping a small flame hovering in his palm for a makeshift flashlight, our guy mutters that he totally thought it was a wolf. He continues his midnight trek through the freezing timber, finally arriving at the snow-dusted signpost pointing the way to Black Goose Village. Cutting back to a few hours prior at the estate, our hero interrogates Hans about the recent monster subjugation. Hans admits he didn't get a good look at the beast himself. He remembers it clearly. Scholars from the Magic Tower had come to the village square to buy the mysterious carcass for research. He described the remains as a giant spider covered in thick silver fur. That description is all our boy needs to pinpoint the creature in his bestiary, a winter spider. In his previous life, our boy read that on their own, these oversized arachnids are basically fodder, but they breed at an ungodly rate to form massive swarms. But the real raid-wiping mechanic isn't their fangs. It's their ambient mana. Exposure to that highly dense energy triggers mana poisoning, a lethal debuff that slowly suffocates its victims. Cutting back to the present day, our hero is out foraging in the snowy woods, putting the final pieces of the puzzle together. Because medical science in this era is practically in the Stone Age, the villagers completely misdiagnosed the magical affliction as a simple case of pneumonia. He scoops up a handful of specific medicinal herbs, knowing they'll at least cleanse the immediate symptoms. But a temporary HP potion isn't going to cut it. Slinging a rifle over his shoulder, our guy resolves to wipe the winter spiders off the map entirely. He has surely asked for the help from his parents, but Count Gerda is stationed way out at a snowy border fortress. And his mother, she is currently traveling the continent desperately searching for a cure for his shattered mana vessel. Waiting for high-level backup would take way too long, and little Hinder's HP bar is already flashing red. Later that night, the snow-covered village sits dead quiet under the moonlight. Inside a dimly lit stone house, the nanny sits a quiet, exhausted vigil by her son's bedside. A sudden knock at the door makes her flinch in the dead of night. She cracks the heavy wood open, nervously asking who could possibly be visiting at this hour. The tension instantly melts from her shoulders as the hooded figure lowers his cloak, revealing our boy Isaac. Instantly switching into full caretaker mode, she fusses over his messy clothes and asks what on earth brought him all the way out here. Even half dead on her feet, her maternal instincts kick in as she gently wipes the dirt from his cheek. But the second our guy tries to step past the threshold, she throws her hands up like a barricade. Panicking, she warns him that little Hinder is suffering from severe pneumonia, terrified of the young master catching the plague. In response, our hero just casually pulls a white cloth mask over his mouth. Brushing off her protests, he shoves a heavy brown sack straight into her hands. Stepping inside, he gives her the exact crafting recipe. Mash the herbs, double brew them, let the liquid cool, and get it into the kid's system. He walks up to the bedside, staring down at the pale, masked face of the sick boy. Leaning in close, our guy spots the telltale bluish marks blooming across the kid's forehead. The ultimate confirmation that this isn't pneumonia, it's straight-up mana poisoning. He gives the boy a gentle tap on the shoulder to rouse him. Hinder's eyes flutter open, and his very first raspy breath is spent begging the young master not to fire his mom. Standing in the doorway, the nanny covers her face, completely breaking down as her son takes the blame for her missing work. Isaac immediately reassures them, softly promising that her job is completely safe. Resting a gloved hand on the kid's feverish head, Isaac tells him to rest and just focus on getting better. The next morning, a clear bright sky dawns over the snowy peaks. The peaceful vibe completely vanishes as our hero stands before the gaping, overgrown maw of an abandoned mountain mine. Staring into the pitch-black abyss, he double-checks with his hired guide to confirm this is indeed a limestone cave. With a flick of his wrist, Isaac tosses the man a gold coin and dismisses him from the raid party. The guide nervously warns him that locals have been vanishing around these parts, but our guy just thanks him for the heads-up and strolls right into the danger zone. He already knows the score. Winter spiders exclusively nest in limestone, making this creepy cavern the absolute perfect hunting ground. Before plunging into the pitch-black abyss, our guy summons a few glowing orbs of magic to light his way. He remembers it clearly. Back during his recent training, he realized that intentionally damaging his mana pathways allowed him to cast 3 spells at the exact same time. Back in the present, he knows he has to tread lightly, because pushing that output too far could shatter his notoriously fragile mana vessel all over again. With zero intel on how many 8-legged freaks are crawling around in the dark, our guy definitely can't afford to spam his magic. Suddenly, his makeshift flashlight catches a cluster of suspicious flora sprouting right out of the damp stone. It's frost belladonna, a nasty little herb packing bright blueberries. While normal humans water this stuff down to use as a mild painkiller, to a winter spider it is straight-up lethal toxic waste. He yanks the roots free, chuckling at the sheer irony of these monsters setting up camp right next door to their own kryptonite. You can literally hear the faint chirping of birds echoing down from the cave entrance, just completely vibing and clueless to the absolute nightmare dungeon our boy is standing in. But down in the gloom, Isaac is already wincing as the raw, unrefined plant leaves angry red chemical burns across his bare fingers. Tying the glowing sack of botanical biohazards to his waist, he pats his stash of pre-crafted runestones and gears up for war. Fully strapped and ready to hunt, our hero marches deeper into the suffocating shadows. The claustrophobic tunnel eventually gives way to a blinding glow, revealing a massive, wind-swept chasm that looks like a straight drop to the underworld. Isaac peers over the dizzying edge, wondering how exactly he's supposed to get down there without taking fatal fall damage. Luckily, he spots the remains of an ancient rotting rope ladder anchored to the rock face. With no other options, our boy carefully scales down the sheer drop, trusting his life to some very questionable craftsmanship. Hitting solid ground at last, he wipes the nervous sweat from his brow. But that brief moment of relief instantly evaporates the second he gets a good look at the cavern floor. The entire area is buried under a literal mountain of animal skeletons, every single one of them completely sucked dry of their bodily fluids. Kneeling in the morbid pile, he picks up a specific fragment and grimly identifies it as a human collarbone. A cold bead of sweat rolls down his cheek as the horrific reality sets in. He just found the missing villagers. Before he can even process the tragedy, the sharp click of a chitinous leg tapping against the stone makes his eyes snap wide open. Rapid, skittering footsteps echo from every direction, completely surrounding him in the suffocating dark. Our boy doesn't even blink, throwing a hand up to summon a blinding sphere of fire as the skittering sounds close in. But the light doesn't reveal spiders. It illuminates a screeching, nightmare-fueled swarm of massive bat-like monsters with glowing red eyes. Thinking fast, Isaac slams his hands down, conjuring a massive swirling ring of flames that forces the screeching beast to flinch back. He slowly rises from his crouch, knowing full well this fiery safe zone comes with a strict expiration date. With clinical precision, he pulls his white cloth mask high over his nose. Dropping back down, our guy channels his mana directly toward the freshly harvested sack of frost belladonna sitting beside him. His icy blue eyes narrow as he points a single gloved finger straight at the toxic payload. He sparks his magic, and the entire sack instantly erupts into a roaring bright blaze. Thick, noxious green smoke violently billows outward, rapidly flooding the claustrophobic cavern. The swarm immediately starts choking, their massive bodies flinching as the potent fumes flood their lungs. Surrounded by a now incapacitated mob of monsters, our hero anchors himself in the dead center of the toxic fog. His gaze glows with absolute deadly intent as he declares that the real hunt has just begun. He remembers it clearly. In his past life, an older version of our hero sat completely isolated in his study. His quiet grind session was suddenly interrupted by furious shouting from outside. Annoyed, he stepped over to the window to see who was ruining his focus. Down below, a mob of furious locals was squaring up against a suited guard protecting a cloaked VIP. One angry villager in a brown coat demanded to know why the territory's so-called master had completely failed them. The crowd screamed bloody murder, accusing the nobles of leaving Black Goose Village to rot. But instead of feeling an ounce of guilt, our guy just turned away, complaining about the noise pollution. He dropped back into his chair, completely and utterly apathetic to the peasant's suffering. Muttering to himself, he casually debated moving his entire workspace down to the basement just to dodge the aggro. He figured a subterranean man cave would be way better for researching his special constitution in peace. He even started theory crafting a plan to line the walls with magic-resistant dimetricium to tank any accidental mana explosions. With a slight smile, he looked up and asked his loyal servant Hans for his take on the renovation. He called out to the empty room, fully expecting his trusty right-hand man to answer. But a split second later, his expression dropped as a grim reality check hit him. He was sitting completely alone in that massive sun-drenched study. Hans was already dead, a tragic casualty of Isaac's own uncontrollable mana explosions. Swallowing that bitter pill, the adult Isaac just blanked his expression and went right back to his paperwork. The relentless scratching of his quill echoed as the only sound in the dead quiet room. His focus zeroed in, his wide blue eyes locking into a hollow obsessive stare. He spent the rest of his days rotting away in the dark, completely ignoring the ruined world falling apart outside his door. Back in the present, our 12-year-old boy is chilling in the middle of a highly toxic cave. He lets out a frustrated sigh, annoyed that his brain keeps buffering on those stale, depressing reruns of his past life. All around him, the surviving winter spiders are staggering like they've had one too many, completely nerfed by the thick green smog. Our guy's big-brain strat of hotboxing the cavern with burning frost belladonna is working flawlessly, suffocating the oversized bugs without him having to lift a finger. But since he isn't immune to his own lethal trap, Isaac is rocking a wet handkerchief mask as a primary filter. On top of that, he's actively flushing the remaining toxins out of his system using a constant stream of internal mana. While juggling all that poison control, he casually readies a hyper-compressed fireball, keeping a phase shift on standby just in case. Maintaining purification, offensive fire magic, and a phase shift all at the exact same time is an absolutely staggering flex for a 12-year-old. This triple threat, multi-circuit casting is exactly what let him safely stall until the smog completely broke the monster's defenses. Now that the oversized bugs are properly paralyzed, our boy just points a single gloved finger and bids them a permanent farewell. A massive fiery explosion instantly obliterates the weakened swarm, shattering their crystalline bodies to ash. Without missing a beat, he hefts his trusty shovel and heavy pack, strolling right through the blazing aftermath to press deeper into the mine. But before he gets too far, a sudden movement in the shadows catches his eye. A handful of surviving winter spiders are desperately scurrying away, and they're all booking it in the exact same direction. A spark of realization hits him. Since they're poisoned, those desperate bugs must be making a beeline for a water source to flush out the toxins. Ready to track them straight to the nest, our guy's boots crunch over the scorched earth as he follows their trail through the lingering flames. Between the roaring flames and the toxic green smog, the tunnel is turning into an absolute sauna, prompting our boy to strip off his heavy coat. He tosses the fur-lined jacket aside, knowing he needs to wrap up this extermination mission before the fumes get to him too. Pushing deeper into the mine, Isaac steps into a massive, blue-lit cavern where the surviving bugs were clearly heading for a drink. But the second he crosses the threshold, a biting chill cuts right through his tunic, making him instantly regret ditching his outerwear. The temperature in this section of the cave has plummeted so hard that the rocky floor is completely glazed over with thick ice. A sudden shadow catches his attention, prompting our guy to look up toward the ceiling. Suspended right above his head is a massive glowing blue cluster of overgrown spider eggs. The sheer volume of the clutch sends a spike of dread down his spine because a nest this size implies one terrifying thing. Before he can even finish the thought, a sharp icicle shatters against the ground, followed by a deep bone-rattling rumble. Heavy rhythmic thuds start echoing through the cavern, shaking the very walls. Isaac stands dead in his tracks beneath the glowing nursery as the colossal footsteps draw closer. Snapping into combat mode, our hero immediately conjures a fresh fireball in his palm, bracing himself for whatever nightmare is about to step out of the shadows. Our guy hurls the flame straight into the pitch-black depths of the cavern. The projectile lights up the darkness for a split second, but it's instantly snuffed out with a pathetic little fizzle. Isaac stares in absolute shock, realizing his spell just got completely negated. A cold sweat breaks out on his neck as a terrifying heavy presence looms right behind him. A massive, heavily armored insectoid monstrosity drops down from the ceiling like a jump scare. His eyes widen in sheer panic as his internal danger alarm screams at him to move. He dives out of the way just as the beast smashes into the ice, cracking the floor. Tumbling across the frozen ground, our hero barely escapes getting flattened into a pancake. He curses his own bad premonitions for always being right on the money. Towering over him is the true raid boss of this dungeon, the Winter Spider Queen. Unlike her squishy minions, this nightmare boasts heavy fire resistance and exhales a lethal bone-chilling frost. The monstrous insectoid lunges forward, its massive spiked legs gouging chunks out of the ice as it closes the gap. Our boy doesn't flinch, instantly clapping back by hurling a condensed fireball right at its ugly mug. Detonating with a massive shockwave, the spell lands a dead center hit on the queen's armored face. But as the smoke clears, Isaac clicks his tongue in frustration. The direct strike did absolutely zero damage. Thanks to that ridiculously thick carapace and innate fire resistance, his standard DPS spells are basically just warming her up. To make matters worse, a sudden wave of dizzying exhaustion hits our hero like a truck. He's been pulling an all-nighter spamming high-tier magic, and this unconditioned 12-year-old vessel is officially hitting its absolute limit. This gargantuan raid boss looms over his tiny fatigued frame, casting an overwhelming shadow across the cavern. As our guy pauses to catch his breath, a sudden grounding thought cuts through the panic. His mind flashes back to exactly why he walked into this death trap in the first place. He remembers it clearly. The warm, mouth-watering slices of soft wheat bread Hans used to bring him. In this frozen, barren northern territory where crops refused to grow, securing such a rare luxury was entirely thanks to his nanny's relentless dedication. Because he was a picky eater who hated rye, she would travel to distant cities every single week just to secure the high-quality wheat he craved. Back in the present, that debt of kindness fuels Isaac, and he grips his weapon with a promise to make it out alive and save her son. He drops into a combat stance, a searing fireball floating at his side like a loyal familiar. Locking in, he rationalizes that a royal title doesn't matter. At the end of the day, a queen is still just an overgrown bug. Kicking off the offensive, he hurls his heavy backpack straight into the monster's frozen face. The bag detonates against her rock-hard carapace like a frag grenade, blasting away a massive cloud of frost. As its glowing red eyes snap onto him, our guy doesn't flinch, charging straight into the danger zone. Closing the gap in a heartbeat, he winds back the shovel with every ounce of his 12-year-old strength. Steel slams into the queen's armored shell with a deafening bone-rattling crunch. But the boss monster's carapace has maxed out defense stats, and the trusty shovel instantly shatters into useless shrapnel. That massive recoil sends a shockwave up his arms, throwing our hero completely off balance. Punishing the stagger, the queen immediately counterattacks, swatting him like a fly and sending him ragdolling backward across the ice. Losing his footing, our guy desperately snatches up a massive chunk of shattered ice. Bro turns that frozen boulder into a makeshift battering ram, slamming it into the queen's face with a concussive blast of force that actually staggers the overgrown bug. Isaac hoists the frozen slab like a makeshift riot shield, gritting his teeth as he tanks a brutal barrage of hits. As he slides across the frost, the harsh reality sets in. Standard long-range fireballs are never going to pierce that max-level armor or land a fatal blow. Scrapping his entire strategy, our boy summons a fresh spark of magic directly into his palm. But instead of yeeting it from a distance, he starts aggressively compressing the raw mana. He condenses the heat further and further, forcing the flames into a blinding, hyper-dense sphere of pure blue energy. Bathed in that intense azure glow, Isaac braces himself for a do-or-die point-blank execution. With a furious roar for the beast to just drop dead, he thrusts his glowing hand straight forward. The blinding blue radiance washes over the queen's terrifying, mandibled face right before impact. The hyper-compressed flames detonate on contact, completely engulfing the boss monster in an agonizing, shrieking inferno. The point-blank nuke does its job, sending the massive winter spider queen crashing to the ice in a roaring inferno of compressed blue flame. But our boy is caught in the crossfire. His arm pinned inside the spider as his exhausted 12-year-old body trembles, completely out of HP. Pushing furthersome how he pulled his arm back. Ripped free from the deadly blaze, our guy tumbles backward onto the freezing ground with a desperate gasp. The adrenaline finally crashes, and our hero collapses unconscious beside the burning, defeated carcass of the raid boss. The freezing cavern falls dead silent, save for the quiet crackle of dying magic. And as the monster's heavy carapace completely disintegrates, a single glowing blue crystal is left resting on the frost. Sometime later, Isaac's eyes flutter open to the disorienting sight of an unfamiliar wooden ceiling. Through the lingering haze, he overhears the hushed, anxious whispers of Hans and his nanny debating how to cover up his little secret excursion. Hans is an absolute wreck, sweating bullets that the young master actually ventured all the way out to the dangerous limestone mine alone. The nanny quietly explains that a local hunter guided him part of the way, which finally jogs Isaac's foggy memory. He remembers it clearly. A few hours, he barely dragged his battered, bleeding body out of that freezing cavern after the queen finally went down. He had managed to stumble his way back to the village entrance, where he found a frantic Hans pacing holes into the dirt. And the absolute second he locked eyes with his loyal servant, his exhausted body had simply shut down. Back in the present, our boy keeps one eye half open, eavesdropping from the bed as Hans happily confirms that little Hinder is completely cured. The loyal retainer smiles warmly, noting that while his young master might be a bit prickly lately, his heart of gold hasn't gone anywhere. Hearing himself get glazed this hard makes our guy blush with sheer, unadulterated awkwardness. Unable to fake sleep through the compliment session any longer, he abruptly sits up, nearly giving both servants a heart attack. He asks for a quick time check, and Hans relieves his stress by confirming he's only been out cold for half a day. But when our hero tries to brush off his injuries as no big deal, the nanny immediately tears up at the sight of her battered young lord. Knowing full well nobody is going to believe a 12-year-old kid just soloed a dungeon boss, Isaac drops a massive cap, claiming he just took a nasty tumble while picking herbs. He smoothly pivots the interrogation to Hinder's condition, and the nanny joyfully reports that thanks to his delivery, all the village children are bouncing back. Our guy smiles in genuine relief, silently deciding it's best to keep the true nature of the monopoisoning strictly under wraps. He pictures if a squad of clueless scholars swarming the abandoned mine and discovering the slaughtered winter spiders. A massive bureaucratic headache he definitely doesn't have time for. When the nanny presses him on how he knew more about medicinal herbs than the estate's own doctor, our boy sweats a little and deflects, claiming he just read about them in some dusty old book. Eager to dodge any more questions, he abruptly pivots, telling Hans to pack it up because they are heading back out into the snow. To shut down any complaints about the freezing weather, Isaac drops a subtle reminder that if the Count finds out they went AWOL, both of their heads are on the chopping block. Before they can slip out the door, the nanny catches them, offering up a woven basket brimming with fresh red apples. She explains that the villagers pooled together the humble harvest, desperate to show their gratitude for the miracle that saved their children. Isaac silently plucks an apple from the pile, the quiet sincerity of the gift actually managing to pierce his usual armor. Without missing a beat, he turns back to the caretaker and casually orders her to take another full week off to make sure Hinder gets back to 100%. She immediately hesitates, terrified that the strict older man with gray hair and a mustache will have her fired for such a massive unexcused absence. But our hero just smirks, playfully clarifying that he isn't exactly giving her a vacation. Holding the shiny fruit up to the light, he issues a very specific, undeniable direct order to cover her tracks. He commands her to spend the week turning the entire basket into sweet apple jam, just so he can have it with his wheat bread the second she returns to work. The realization of what he's doing hits her all at once, and the nanny's eyes well up with tears, completely overwhelmed by the young master's incredibly thoughtful alibi. With a warm smile, our boy tosses out one last suggestion: maybe she could bake an apple pie while she's at it. She happily agrees, and a peaceful snowy night settles over the quiet village. A week later, a bright morning sun blazes over the sprawling Goethe estate. Down in the expansive courtyard, Isaac is pushing his 12-year-old body to the absolute breaking point. He sprints across the stone pathways, chest heaving and sweat dripping from his chin as he grinds through the exhaustion. Our guy hasn't skipped a single day of this grueling physical conditioning, and all that relentless, lung-burning effort has already triggered a massive upgrade to his internal mana vessel. In his mind's eye, he visualizes the glowing network of his mana circuits, watching as the 3 pathways officially expand into a stable 4. This stabilization is a total game-changer, meaning he can now juggle 4 simultaneous magic spells without his vessel shattering into a million pieces. Sure, surviving that life-or-death brawl with the Spider Queen forced his limits to stretch, but this daily cardio grind is what actually cemented the growth. He pictures the glowing core of his own brain, fully aware that wielding high-level magic demands immense calculation and intuition. A massive mental drain that relies entirely on raw physical stamina. The only reason he nearly flatlined down in that limestone mine was because his scrawny, untrained preteen body just couldn't keep up with his mind. He remembers it clearly. In his previous life, it was his loyal servant Lucas who ran him through those grueling stamina drills. Back in the present, our boy clenches his fist, making a silent vow to never let a weak physical stat block hold him back again. But before he can get another set in, the crisp sound of approaching footsteps interrupts his grind. The older man with gray hair and a mustache rolls up to the courtyard, bringing along a guy with a medical bag to announce it's time for the young master's routine checkup. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Isaac clocks Schiller and the doctor immediately. The personal doctor offers a polite bow, formally asking how his VIP patient is holding up today. Taking a seat by the fountain, our hero reflects that despite this guy being the most hyped-up physician in the neighboring territory, he never actually grasped the mechanics of a shattered mana vessel. After a quick once-over, the doc is genuinely stunned to find his patient looking healthier than he ever has. The physician immediately decides to switch up the medicine, prompting a silent scoff from our guy at the hilariously hasty diagnosis. Popping open his bag, the doctor pulls out a vial of glowing purple liquid, introducing it as Panacea, a premium potion meant to stabilize turbulent mana flow. Inspecting the colorful brew, Isaac has to hand it to Count Goethe. His old man really spared zero expense when it came to securing the good stuff. Translating to a literal cure, all in the common tongue, this elixir is widely famous as a top-tier stimulant and a heavy-duty performance enhancer for frontline soldiers. Thanks to his past life's endless research, our boy pictures the exact moment centuries ago when some clueless hooded translator completely botched the ancient text, slapping the label of mana stabilizer onto a recipe that does the exact opposite. In reality, this premium brew is a raw stimulant, meaning for a guy whose mana vessel is already a ticking time bomb, drinking this stuff is basically downing straight poison. A sly smirk creeps onto Isaac's face as he bids the physician farewell, already calculating exactly how to weaponize this poison as the ultimate catalyst to forcibly rip his monocircuits wide open. With the checkup officially in the books, the doctor turns on his heel and heads across the sunlit courtyard. While our boy notices Schiller is still standing and staring at him. When our boy steps up to ask if something is wrong, Schiller finally points out the elephant in the room. Our boy is acting way too calm today. He reminds the young master that, historically, just making eye contact with him was enough to trigger a full-blown vase-smashing tantrum. Unfazed by his own notorious track record, my guy just lets out a dry chuckle and asks if he should start throwing a fit right now. The Schiller doesn't laugh, his eyes narrowing sharply behind his spectacles as he silently scrutinizes the teen. Deciding it's time to drop the polite formalities, the head butler takes a breath and lays his cards on the table. He casually drops a bombshell, revealing he knows exactly who cured the pneumonia outbreak over in Black Goose Village. Isaac physically flinches at the call-out, instantly realizing the Schiller must have pulled Hans aside and interrogated the poor servant to uncover his secret side quest. The head butler warns him that if the advisory committee catches wind of an unlicensed teenager playing miracle healer, the fallout will be disastrous. But instead of turning him in, the head butler sighs, agreeing to sweep this little vigilante mission under the rug just this once. Leaning in close, Schiller shoots the young master a deadly serious glare, firmly telling him to keep his head down and restrain himself from now on. As the medical checkup wraps up, Isaac's gaze shifts to Schiller, reflecting on how he could never bridge the gap with the head butler in his previous life. He remembers it clearly. Schiller had always been a dry, unbending old man who kept everyone at a cold distance. Back in the present, to our hero's surprise, the butler steps forward to grab the suitcase handle, offering an unexpected compromise. Schiller looks him in the eye and tells the teen that if he truly can't hold back from these reckless stunts, he needs to at least run his plans by him first. The surprising show of support hits our guy hard, bringing back memories of the timeline he left behind. In his previous life, Schiller had remained fiercely loyal, staying at his post until the Goethe household completely collapsed. Realizing that this stern old man secretly cares deeply for the family, our boy smiles warmly and offers a genuine word of thanks. Schiller is visibly caught off guard by the sincere gratitude, his usual stony expression softening just a fraction. Quickly clearing his throat to change the subject, the head butler glances out at the courtyard and asks why the young master has been running himself into the ground every single day. Our hero confidently explains that throughout history, every high-class mage trained their physical body to properly channel their immense power. Schiller listens in silence, clearly impressed by the 12-year-old's profound understanding of the arcane. Later that evening, a white-gloved hand carefully drags a fountain pen across a fresh document. Sitting in his dimly lit office, the head butler drafts a formal report confirming that my guy successfully cured the village children of their mysterious illness. He notes that while our boy's shattered constitution makes traditional spellcasting difficult, he shows incredible promise for a brilliant future as a scholar or alchemist. A rare, satisfied smile crosses Schiller's face, hoping this glowing assessment will finally lift some of the heavy worries off the Count's shoulders. But his quiet moment of reflection is suddenly interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. A red-haired maid peeks into the office, looking incredibly hesitant to disturb him. Schiller looks up from his desk, recognizing her as Rosa and calmly asking what brings her here. Stepping fully into the room, the distressed girl clutches her hands together, fearing the worst. She frantically reports that several maids have been disappearing from the estate without a trace, including a diligent worker named Annette, who hasn't missed a single day in 3 years. As Rosa insists that something terrible must have happened, the comic cuts to a dark, gloomy cave, revealing Annette lying bound and gagged on the cold stone floor. A blue-haired maid rests her chin in her hand, chewing on a mystery that just isn't adding up. Kicking back outside the estate with Rosa and a brown-haired butler, she points out a massive red flag. 3 maids have vanished without a trace in just 2 months. The butler just shrugs it off with a smirk, casually blaming the brutal northern weather and the local monster spawn rates for the sudden staff turnover. But the blue-haired maid isn't buying that RNG excuse, arguing that their missing coworker Annette was grinding way too hard for her sick father's medicine to just ghost them. Leaning on his broom, the butler drops the most toxic take imaginable, guessing Annette probably just got sick of playing nurse and bailed. Rosa instantly snaps at the sheer disrespect, screaming at the butler, "Bill, to watch his trash mouth." Unfazed by the aggro, Bill waves off the heat and insists he's got his own galaxy brain theory about the missing girls. Flashing a deeply punchable, mysterious grin, he raises a single finger to drop the real lore. He pitches a straight-up conspiracy theory, painting a mental picture of a glowing skull over a purple magic circle to suggest that dark magic is snatching up the staff. While the maids recoil at the sheer edge of the claim, Bill reminds them that they literally work for the Goethes, a hardcore family of mages. The butler drops an absolute tinfoil hat theory, painting a terrifying mental image of Count Goethe going full dark magic mode and sacrificing the staff just to cure our boy's illness. The sheer horror of the accusation hits the maids like a truck, leaving them gasping and screaming at Bill in total terrified disbelief. Bill just smirks, arrogantly standing 10 toes down on his unhinged theory. Rosa isn't having it, furiously defending the master's honor and reminding Bill that the Count literally took him in despite his shady criminal record. But right as she's tearing into him, a slow, deliberate set of footsteps approaches the group from behind. The butler whips around, completely caught off guard as a calm voice cuts right through the argument. Enter our boy, Isaac von Goethe, stepping up with absolute authority and confidently demanding to hear the full details of this little rumor. Suddenly sweating bullets, Bill folds instantly and starts spilling the tea, explaining that the whole mess kicked off 2 months ago. Bill explains the first maid, Hild, vanishing into thin air without a single trace. Then the second maid, Clara, walking away just a few weeks later. Finally, the grim story closes on Annette, who went out for weekend mass and never made it back. The comic cuts to a grand sunlit office, where our hero sits behind a massive desk like an absolute boss while Bill stands awkwardly at attention. Those striking blue eyes lock onto the butler with piercing intensity, as my guy calmly asks if Bill has any idea why they're going missing. Completely intimidated by the kid's terrifying glare, Bill stammers out a weak denial, sweating under the heavy pressure. Leaning back, our boy smoothly promises the sweating butler that he can speak his mind with zero risk of punishment. Bill just stands there fidgeting, chewing on his words like a guy who knows he's walking into a trap. Cutting right to the chase, our guy bluntly asks if Bill blames him for the disappearances, making the poor butler flinch so hard he chokes. Rubbing his neck with a nervous chuckle, Bill admits that it's kind of the obvious conclusion. He points out that the servant Han closest to the young master is basically a walking punching bag. Digging his own grave deeper, the butler awkwardly smiles and predicts that out of everyone in the estate, Hans is absolutely guaranteed to meet a violent end. The temperature in the room drops to absolute zero as our hero falls dead silent, his face completely shadowed, while Bill instantly realizes he just screwed up. From the shadows, Isaac coldly drops a single word, Bill. The butler absolutely loses his mind, screaming in pure terror as he begs the kid to spare his life. While Bill frantically rambles about being unmarried and childless, our guy just rests his chin on his hand and calmly asks if he wants to live. Flashing a faint manipulative smile, our boy leverages that sheer panic, casually offering the butler a job instead of an early grave. Thinking he just dodged the Reaper, Bill clasps his hands together in absolute overwhelming relief. Later that night, a heavy silence settles over the estate under a serene, star-lit sky. Sitting alone in the dim light of his bedroom, our guy idly manipulates a streak of blue flame as 2 specific names drift into his mind. He balances the glowing ember on his fingertip, confirming that Rosa and Annette were exactly who he was thinking of. Staring deep into the fire, his mind drifts back to the darkest era of his past life, right after he lost Hans and his beloved nanny. In his past life, out of the entire terrified staff, those 2 were the only maids who actually volunteered to serve him. A shattered glass vial lay across his bedroom floor, its glowing purple contents bleeding into the rug. Fresh drops of crimson blood pattered heavily into the spilled magical medicine. A much younger, deeply broken Isaac stood in the dim light with a bleeding hand, harshly ordering the 2 women out of his sight. When they hesitated, he lashed out, screaming at them to leave with a ferocity that made Rosa physically flinch. He completely rejected their attempts to help, bitterly declaring that their healing potions were just a waste of time. Despite his terrifying outburst, the red-haired maid desperately tried to comfort him, gently begging the young master not to give up hope. But to a kid whose entire world had already shattered, that single word only plunged him deeper into the suffocating dark. He screamed at them, demanding to know if they had any idea what it felt like to murder someone they loved. The agonizing guilt crushed him as he clenched his blood-stained fingers, drowning in self-hatred. But instead of backing away, the brown-haired maid quietly stepped past a stunned Rosa. Looking the broken boy dead in the eye, Annette confessed that she too had caused a dear friend's death. The raw admission caught Isaac completely off guard, piercing right through his defensive rage. With Rosa watching in quiet concern, Annette began to open up about her own trauma. She carried a suffocating regret, admitting that if she had just reached out her hand, she might have saved Clara from her fate. Looking down at him with profound empathy, she gently explained that anyone could end up committing terrible, unintended mistakes. She promised him that such senseless tragedies were just a cruel part of life, bound to happen to anyone at least once. Her bleak, pessimistic worldview actually brought the young master a strange sense of comfort. Back in the present, sitting alone in his room, Isaac can't help but regret not asking Annette more about the demons she was hiding. But before my guy can spiral any deeper into his memories, a sudden knock at the door violently snaps him back to reality. Right on cue, Bill announces his return from the other side of the heavy wooden doors. Inside, our boy wastes zero time, demanding to know if the butler managed to track down the missing staff. A few hours ago, Bill easily bought the scoop off the local street beggars. Isaac leans forward, pressing the butler for the bottom line. Bill drops the grim truth. The women were bait and switched by slave traders, promising a better life, only to be shipped off to the south. When our hero questions why they didn't just make the trek themselves, Bill actually scoffs at his sheltered naivety. The butler starts laying out the absolute logistical nightmare of a cross-country move. Bill points out they'd need armed mercenaries and secured freeman status just to survive the trip. Isaac nods, the harsh reality of the world outside his estate finally clicking into place. Bill inwardly chuckles, writing off the young master as just another clueless kid who doesn't know how the real world operates. But then a metaphorical light bulb goes off in the butler's head, as he suddenly clocks the real reason for this interrogation. Clearing his throat, Bill smoothly shifts the conversation to the fat stack of cash just spent bribing those informants. Bill shamelessly rubs his fingers together, flashing a sly grin as he admits he blew through the entire travel budget. Our boy deadpans that 20 silver coins is easily half a year's wages. Sweating bullets under the young master's piercing glare, the butler nervously laughs it off, claiming the local informants drove a hard bargain. But instead of chewing him out, Isaac waves off the expense, stating that speed is the only currency he cares about right now, prompting an obnoxiously exaggerated display of gratitude from his greedy employee. The sycophant eagerly asks if there's anything else he can do, and our hero confirms there is one more job on the docket. Flashing a dangerously calculating smirk, Isaac promises a massive payout if the butler is willing to take on the gig. Bill practically bites his hand off to accept, internally celebrating that he's hooked an absolute sucker of a payday. In his head, the scheming butler is already treating our boy like an infinite money glitch, happily ignoring the minor detail that this kid is a literal ticking time bomb. Completely blinded by the dollar signs in his eyes, Bill enthusiastically volunteers to personally guide his boss straight to the slave broker. He lets out a hearty belly laugh, fully embracing the Sigma grind set of a high-risk, high-return lifestyle. But the comic violently smash cuts to reality, revealing Bill stripped down to his boxer shorts and locked inside a pitch-black dungeon cell. The high-roller lifestyle instantly evaporates as the half-naked butler shivers violently next to a cobweb-covered skull, realizing he completely played himself. Gripping the cold iron bars, the panicked butler screams at the top of his lungs, desperately trying to figure out where it all went wrong. As he wails about his miserable new reality, the camera pulls back to reveal our boy standing completely unfazed in the shadows outside. Illuminating the pitch-black corridor with his glowing blue crystal, Isaac flashes a chilling, ominous smile, proving that absolutely nobody hustles the young master and gets away with it. Deep in the damp, heavily guarded depths of a stone dungeon, the grim reality of the situation is finally setting in. Sweating bullets and gripping the cold iron bars, Bill curses his absolute garbage RNG. Rewind to a few hours ago, when everything was going perfectly according to script. He easily secured a cover story, and handed our boy over to the very same shady broker who took the missing maids. But there was one massive, fatal flaw in this galaxy brain scheme. Isaac's premium genetics made him way too valuable. The trafficker took one look at the kid's ethereal, top-tier visuals, and immediately decided to bag him up for the black market instead. Back in the present, the shirtless traitor violently shakes the bars, absolutely molding over how his own flawless betrayal blew up in his face. Whipping around, he redirects all that salty rage right at the kid who dragged him into this mess. Because while Bill was stripped down to his boxers, our guy is chilling fully clothed, completely zoning out to experiment with his glowing blue monostone. The frantic former butler screams at him to drop the rock and reveal whatever 40 chess escape plan he cooked up to get them out of here. But our hero just closes his eyes and exhales, leaving his panicking cellmate completely on read. When our boy finally breaks his silence, he just coldly points out that his former butler seems to have dropped all the polite formalities. He casually announces he's heading out to rescue Annette and the rest of the missing staff. Bill practically chokes on a sarcastic scoff, demanding to know how a 12-year-old kid plans to bypass a wall of solid iron. Without a single word, our guy just reaches a hand toward the cage. A horrifying metallic screech suddenly echoes through the cramped cell, and with a deafening crash, the supposedly impenetrable iron bars crumple to the floor like cheap twigs. Bill's jaw practically unhinges in absolute brain short-circuiting disbelief. Suddenly sweating buckets, the traitor tentatively stammers out the young master's title. He instantly changes his tune, shamelessly begging Isaac not to leave him stranded in this pitch-black maze. But that little demolition stunt wasn't exactly stealthy, and down the hall, a pair of dungeon guards hear the commotion and start moving in. Completely unfazed by the incoming threat, our hero just steps over the rubble and cheerfully wishes his backstabbing butler good luck with his own escape. But before he can even clear the doorway, a heavy thud stops him dead in his tracks. The treacherous butler instantly face plants onto the cold stone, dropping straight to his hands and knees. Total panic mode activated, the guy screams out a pathetic plea for salvation, swearing absolute loyalty and promising to do literally anything if Isaac just takes him along. Our guy slowly turns back around, his icy blue eyes completely devoid of warmth as he calculates his next move. He drops Bill's actual name, his voice dripping with an eerie, knowing familiarity that completely shifts the dynamic. The young master casually mentions that he's watched him put on this exact same pathetic display before. He remembers it clearly. Decades ago in Isaac's past life, Bill found himself in this exact same desperate position. Kneeling bound in the freezing snow, the traitor sobbed and begged the blonde master of the house for a shred of mercy. But the master coldly recounted Bill's slimy history, as a former bandit who only survived a subjugation raid by ratting out his own crew. Snitching on thieves was one thing, but his latest betrayal crossed a line. Staring down at the terrified, crying man, the master declared his trust was permanently broken. Bill kept hyperventilating and pleading for a second chance, only for a dark-haired man with glasses to furiously shut him up. His absolute boneheaded crime of trying to fence the family's secret books to an underground criminal syndicate had officially sealed his fate. With a single swing, the blonde master executed him right there in the blood-stained snow. That was then. Staring down at the very same man, our boy realizes that this treacherous rat could actually be a top-tier pawn if he wasn't so blinded by his own greed. Piecing it together, he deduces that Bill must have tapped into his old underground network to track down the missing maids. And if his regressor memory serves him right, Isaac recalls it vividly. In his past life, the criminal organization Bill tried to sell the books to was the exact same bandit group that had abducted the maids. A grim vision flashes behind his eyes of these traffickers spreading like a plague across the territory if left unchecked. Isaac decides that any weed threatening his family's garden is getting violently uprooted before it can even sprout. Pulling out a sealed parchment scroll, he reminds the sniveling traitor of his promise to do absolutely anything to survive. The young master tosses the document down, giving the desperate man one single high-stakes chance to prove his worth. Meanwhile, the comic cuts to a dimly lit stone hideout far from the estate. 3 men stands inside and lined up before the seated boss. The leader, addressed only as father, ignores them entirely as he casually slices into a slab of meat. The men recoil in pure unfiltered horror at the sickening display. The seated man leans across the table, his eyes wide with unhinged intensity as he strikes up a conversation with his dinner guest. He swears up and down that once his black magic ritual goes off without a hitch, they'll finally be reunited. He actually throws a little pout when his companion hits him with the silent treatment. Probably because his dinner date is literally just a human skull impaled on a wooden stake. Just then the boss asks one of the men for his bathwater. In return, the man answers the leader that they are of the stock and the only remaining are merchandise for sale. Before the guy can even blink, the boss's gloved hand clamps violently over his entire face. With absolute gorilla strength, he lifts the grown man clean off the floor, the sickening crunch of collapsing bone echoing through the chamber. A fresh coat of crimson splatters across the leader's face as he effortlessly executes his own lackey. Dropping the lifeless corpse like a sack of potatoes, he turns to his terrified crew and sadistically suggests using the fresh blood to fill up that bathwater. Leaving his traumatized goons to mop up the mess, the psycho casually strolls out of the room. His heavy footsteps echo ominously as he vanishes down the dark corridor. The 2 surviving subordinates are left trembling beside the fresh corpse of their comrade. Holding his head in distress, the short-haired subordinate curses whatever black magic has completely deep-fried their leader's brain. Looking at a plate smeared with gore, they realize that if these bloody sacrifices keep escalating, they're definitely next on the chopping block. Resigned to their grim reality, the cloaked subordinate grabs the dead man's legs to drag him away. But before they can finish the cleanup, a sudden heavy thud from the hallway freezes them in place. Cautiously, the 2 henchmen peek out into the corridor. At first glance, the arched stone hallway seems completely empty and dead silent. Then a sudden paralyzing chill runs down their spines. A wet, heavy rustling sound echoes from the shadows, slowly drawing closer. The tension spikes as one of the men gulps hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. Out of nowhere, a fresh nightmare rolls out of the darkness and stops right at their feet. It's the severed head of Boss Nyers. The gruesome trophy stares up at them with lifeless eyes, a chilling promise that their bad night is about to get way worse. Thick dark blood smears across the cold stone floor, painting a gruesome trail behind the dead man's unblinking stare. The 2 surviving bandits are instantly paralyzed, the color violently draining from their faces as their brains completely short-circuit. Their legs give out, sending them collapsing to the ground in a stuttering mess as they fail to process that their untouchable boss was just butchered. A heavy blood-soaked boot steps out of the darkness, looming over the trembling thugs. A hand gripping a massive, dripping meat cleaver slides into view, accompanied by a terrifyingly casual request for a drink. The short-haired subordinate looks up, his pupils blown wide as a horrifying realization takes hold. A sinister blood-splattered smile stretches through the gloom as the terrified man stammers out a single name. It is Bill. Completely unhinged, drenched head to toe in fresh gore and wielding a butcher's blade like an absolute demon. Brushing his slick hair back with a crazed, dead-eyed glare, the blood-soaked survivor aggressively demands a glass of water from the cowering bastards. White-knuckling a blood-soaked meat cleaver, Bill seriously questions how he ended up in this mess. Covered in fresh gore and sweating bullets, he curses out the silver-haired menace who forced him into this slaughterhouse run. Rewind to earlier today, back when the shirtless traitor was handed a mysterious piece of parchment after promising he'd do absolutely anything to survive. Our boy cheerfully informed him that the little scrap of paper was a binding contract. Standing in the torch-lit dungeon, the young master laid out the ironclad terms: absolute unquestioning obedience and zero snitching. Bill's eyes practically bugged out of his skull when he heard the penalty for a breach of contract was instant, non-negotiable death. To make the deal even sweeter, our guy casually offered up a massive meat cleaver, explaining that the magic required a fresh blood signature. Before Bill could even try to negotiate out of it, the heavy thud of approaching footsteps echoed down the stone hallway. Completely unbothered, our hero flashed a chillingly calm smile and urged the traitor to hurry the hell up. He masterfully played on Bill's desperate will to live, asking if he actually wanted to survive the night or die right here in the dirt. The heavy boots of the syndicate guards drew dangerously close, putting a literal ticking clock on the negotiation. And the blank parchment just sat there waiting for its gruesome red seal. Cursing his miserable luck, Bill snatched the heavy blade right out of the air. With a sharp wince, the desperate traitor dragged the steel across his own finger. He pressed his bleeding digit firmly onto the waiting parchment. Instantly, a swirling aura of magical light erupted from the document, officially binding his soul to the young master. Our boy just smirked, completely unfazed as the dungeon doors burst open. 3 armed bandits stormed into the cell, demanding to know how the hell their prisoners got loose. Leaving a panicking Bill in the dust, Isaac dashed forward as an absolute blur of motion. Moving with god-tier speed, he struck all 3 thugs square in the face at the exact same time. The guards collapsed to the stone floor in perfect unison, while our hero stood casually with a glowing orb hovering in his palm. He calmly assured his stunned new minion that the men were merely knocked out, not dead. Bill could only stare in absolute disbelief at the 12-year-old's overwhelming power. The terrifying reality finally clicked in his brain. The kid was wielding actual, literal magic. Plunging deeper into the syndicate's underground sewer system, the damp air grew thick and heavy. Bill took the point, his heavy boots splashing along the stone path. Sweating bullets, he tried to butter up our boy, hyping up his incredibly rare use of ice magic. But Isaac casually brushed off the compliment, noting that the elemental spec was actually notoriously impractical. Staring into the glowing blue crystal in his hand, our guy admitted the flashy spell was basically all bark and no bite. Suddenly Bill froze dead in his tracks. He hissed a frantic warning as he spotted another squad of bandits lurking just up ahead. Completely ignoring the life-or-death stealth mission, our hero casually hit his minion with a pop quiz, asking what base component was needed to craft ice. Totally thrown by the impromptu trivia, Bill stammered out a wild guess for water. Isaac confirmed the obvious answer, effortlessly pulling a floating blob of moisture right out of the damp air into his palm. He broke down the grueling 4-stage casting process, detailing the absolute headache of compression, condensation, expansion, and evaporation. As the water froze into a perfectly glowing sphere, the 12-year-old noted that executing all 4 steps simultaneously was basically impossible. While Bill practically had a heart attack begging him to keep his voice down. Down the hall, a patrolling bandit finally caught wind of the glowing blue light show. Our boy immediately shoved Bill back into the shadows just as the guard started screaming for answers. Isaac's eye flared with a brilliant azure aura as he locked in the final step of the cast. A massive roaring wave of frost magic hurtled down the stone corridor. The poor goon could only stare in sheer terror at the incoming flash freeze. The phase shift magic slammed into the guard like a freight train, blasting him violently backward into the darkness. As the man collapsed in a heap, our hero casually sighed, reiterating that the spell's ridiculous complexity made it total garbage in a real fight. Isaac casually revealed he wouldn't have even bothered flexing this parlor trick if he didn't have a massive cheat code up his sleeve. He glanced down at the frost monostone, a top-tier drop he had salvaged straight from the carcass of the Winter Spider Queen. Our guy looked pretty thrilled with his shiny new loot, clearly knowing its insane academic and monetary value. Staring at the unconscious guard, Bill questioned why Isaac would even bother with such an inconvenient spell if it was so much trouble. The young master dropped the real reason, explaining that the ice impact mimicked blunt force trauma and melted away, leaving zero magical evidence for anyone to track. Flashing a cocky smirk, our boy declared it the absolute perfect tool for a stealth run. A cold chill ran straight down Bill's spine as he processed the kid's ruthless calculating logic. When 2 more bandits rounded the corner, the terrified traitor asked why his young master wasn't just finishing these guys off. Dashing forward in a blur, Isaac casually explained that dead grunts were way too easily replaced by the syndicate. Without missing a beat, he sniped the newcomers right in the face with 2 precise glowing blue projectiles, knocking them flat. His glowing eyes narrowed with pure lethal intent as he finally laid out his real endgame. Suddenly, the heavy, ominous thud of boots echoed from the shadows ahead. Standing calmly with another ice sphere locked and loaded, our hero coldly stated that he only intended to kill one specific person tonight. Right on cue, a massive imposing figure stepped into the archway, completely blocking off their escape route. The towering wall of muscle glared down at the 2 escapees with deep rumbling annoyance. Bill nearly jumped out of his own skin the second he recognized the hulking brute. He frantically warned Isaac that this was Boss Nyers, An absolute lunatic infamous for tearing men apart with his bare hands. Instead of panicking, our boy just smiled, looking genuinely thrilled that he wouldn't have to waste time hunting the leader down. The frost stone in his palm flared with blinding absolute zero energy. With a single casual finger raise, Isaac summoned a massive razor-sharp ice spear right above his head. He launched the frozen javelin down the corridor like an artillery shell. But Nyers didn't even blink as the deadly projectile closed the distance. Swinging his bare hand like a baseball bat, the bandit boss deflected the massive spell, shattering it into a million glittering pieces. Bill shrieked in absolute terror, but our hero just calmly noted aloud the brute's ridiculous stats, guessing he had to be from a northern tribe to pack that kind of raw physical strength. Nyers casually rubbed his slightly stinging arm, completely ignoring Bill as he wailed that they were about to be turned into mincemeat. Standing unharmed, Nyers called them. He flashes a sinister grin, absolutely thrilled to find his missing merchandise wandering the corridors. Taking one look at Isaac, the stranger gleefully declared he was dealing with a mage, boasting that our guy would make premium material for his dark rituals. As the boss stepped forward, Bill's remaining spine completely evaporated and pathetically begged for his life. The boss reached out with a shadowy, glowing hand, fully intending to claim the cowering traitor. Shielding his face, the pathetic traitor screamed at the top of his lungs that he was just a normal human. But before the hand could even touch him, the boss stopped right in his track. Bill cracked open one eye, absolutely stunned to find himself still breathing. A horrifying whistling sound fills the damp air just as a massive ice spike violently erupts right through the boss's chest from behind. Bill stares in shock as it becomes clear our hero weaponized the exact same ice spear boss Nyers deflected earlier, redirecting the shattered shards into a lethal backstab. Our guy simply maintains his casting stance down the hall, his glowing blue eyes completely cold and unyielding. The dark sorcerer violently chokes on his own blood as the last of his life rapidly fades away. As the corpse hits the stone floor with a heavy thud, Isaac casually turns his attention back to his trembling servant. Without missing a beat, our boy officially appoints Bill as the brand new leader of this underground sector. Staring directly into the man's terrified eyes, he chillingly asks if Bill knows exactly what needs to be done next. Gripping his massive meat cleaver with white knuckles, the sweating traitor's wide eyes show he realizes the absolute bloodbath of a task he's just been handed. Letting out a desperate broken yell, the terrified traitor sprints down the corridor to slaughter the remaining bandits. Isaac stands perfectly still, listening to the sickening, squelching echoes of Bill hacking his former comrades to pieces. Closing his eyes, the young master's heavy sigh reflects the grim reality of being forced to commit unspeakable acts. He remembers it clearly. Decades ago in his previous life he stood in a lavish bedroom with his hands stained red. His loyal maid Annette gently warned him that the psychological scars of taking a life would never fade. As she wiped the gore from his trembling fingers, she laid out two choices. He could either suffocate under the crushing weight of his guilt, or he could shoulder the burden and struggle to live on for the sake of those who died. Back in then, Isaac opens his eyes, his expression hardened by the memory. His expression hardens with determination, clearly driven by the realization that her profound advice had stemmed from her own crushing guilt over losing Clara to these very slavers. Back to the present as he approaches the syndicate's holding cells, our hero's determined stride makes it clear he won't let her suffer that guilt a second time. Meanwhile, hours later, outside the square, a carriage rolls to a halt beneath the starry night sky. Inside the carriage, Annette and Clara huddled together in the gloom as they approaches the estate. Our boy's unwavering gaze proves that in this life, Annette is never going to lose her friend. Kicking things off in the estate workroom, the local gossip mill is running at full capacity as one of the maids drops a juicy rumor about southern nobles hunting for out-of-town brides. Her co-workers immediately eat it up, theorizing that the southern women must be totally busted if the lords are desperately looking elsewhere for some eye candy. When one of the girls actually considers shooting her shot down south, the rumor-monger leans in with the real tea. She whispers that there's a shady underground guide willing to smuggle them across the border for the right price. A flashback hits Annette, recalling the moment her friends tried to rope her into the sketchy road trip. But being the responsible one of the group, she passed on the offer to stay behind and take care of her sick dad. Back in the present, Annette wraps up her grim report to our boy, confirming that was the last time anyone ever saw Hild and Clara. The young master connects the dots to Bill's intel, asking if she got snatched up by the syndicate while trying to play detective. The trauma weighs heavy on her face as she admits that by the time she finally tracked her friends down in the underground holding cells, their minds were completely shattered. She confesses that a few more days in that hellhole would have broken her too, a grim reality our guy fully understands. In his mind's eye, a horrific vision of a blood-soaked butchery room flashes by, and he notes how the sheer depravity of that human meat market was enough to rattle even a 70-year-old regressor like him. But before he can dwell on the dark reality, Annette drops an absolute bombshell, confessing that she actually could have walked right out of that dungeon whenever she wanted. She tells him that the iron gate keeping her locked in was completely broken, giving her a clean shot at freedom. A flashback hits Annette, taking her back to a few weeks ago, where she stood trapped behind those very bars in the pitch-black sewer. A sickening, erratic giggling echoed from the darkness, freezing the blood in her veins. Peering through the iron grate, she found Clara huddled on the filthy stone floor, her mind completely shattered. The sheer horror of the situation clawed at her, forcing her to realize that staying even a second longer meant she would lose her sanity too. But as her trembling hand gripped the cold metal, the paralyzing guilt of leaving her broken friend behind nearly crushed her spirit. Our boy listens in heavy silence, his eyes narrowing as he absorbs the crushing weight of her trauma. She finishes her grim tale by admitting that if she hadn't run, the encroaching madness would have driven her to kill Clara with her own two hands. Isaac gently thanks her for ripping open those old wounds, offering a rare moment of genuine empathy. But the maid hesitates, nervously fidgeting before confessing that there is one more detail still gnawing at her. A flashback hits Annette. Back then, when the bandits first told the captive girls they were being sent back to the estate, she and Clara were flooded with relief. But Hild had a completely different reaction, biting her thumb in absolute terror and sobbing that returning to the mansion would be a fate worse than death. Annette confirms it wasn't just a fear of strict punishment. Hild genuinely believed stepping foot back in the estate was a guaranteed death sentence. Our boy leans back, processing the chilling implication that there's a traitor in their own home, and promises to dig into it. A heavy silence settles over the study as the weight of that conspiracy hangs between them. But Annette breaks the tension with a warm smile, admitting that the other maids have a wild theory. They think Isaac is the hidden reason the syndicate let them go. Our guy practically sweats a bullet, internally panicking at how terrifyingly perceptive his staff can be. She adds that it makes perfect sense to them, because he's the only noble in the whole mansion who actually treats the maids like human beings. The raw, unshakable trust in her voice leaves him completely silent. He finally speaks her name, holding her gaze. He offers a quiet, sincere thanks, deeply moved by their faith in him. He starts to add something else but catches himself, deciding to save it for later as she politely bows out. The heavy wooden door clicks shut behind her. Left alone in the quiet room, our hero slides a document across his desk, his mind already shifting to a new revelation. A smug grin spreads across our guy's face as the math finally starts mathing. Our boy has found an untapped magical talent that might just be worth training. Meanwhile, outside the sunlit estate, the rumor mill is already working overtime. The staff can't stop whispering about the miraculous return of the missing girls. Word on the cobblestone is that Isaac threw down with the head butler just to keep them from getting booted out, a juicy tidbit that completely ignores the servant strolling right past them. The gossips giggle, entirely misreading the rescue mission as teenage hormones kicking in, totally oblivious to Bill slipping away in the background. The suited servant ducks out of the bright courtyard and slips into a heavy stone storage building. He drops his stack of supplies in the dim light, thinking he's off the clock and completely alone in the shadows. But a gruff voice calls out from the dark, addressing him with a heavy-hitting title. Bill snaps back, clearly annoyed at being called boss, but the rank is no joke. He is the newly minted kingpin of the local criminal syndicate. A flashback hits Isaac, taking him back to a few days ago down in the blood-soaked sewers where he laid out the cold hard facts of underworld ecology to his terrified captive. Knowing that wiping out one gang would just spawn another mob in its place, our boy extended a hand and executed a hostile takeover, installing his own puppet to rule the trash from the top down. Back in the present, the terrifying reality of his promotion sets in. Bill realizes our guy engineered this whole setup so that if the crew ever mutinies, the new boss will be the first one on the chopping block. Trying to get a read on his new empire, he asks the grunts if the late boss Nyers only planted spies in the Gerda estate, and they confirm they were strictly on mansion watch. A grudging smirk crosses Bill's face as he realizes his predecessor wasn't just a meathead, but a guy playing some serious 4D chess. But the lore drop isn't over. The spiky-haired lackey chimes in to mention that the old boss always prepared an annual tribute. The new kingpin does a double take, completely out of the loop on what kind of protection money they're supposed to be paying. The grunt spells it out. Every year around this time, the syndicate has to cough up a hefty offering to the local knights. The sheer scale of the corruption hits Bill like a truck. The only reason this gutter trash gang has survived so long is because the supposed enforcers of justice have been backing them the whole time. A few days later, the comic cuts to a lavishly decorated room where our hero is enjoying some much-needed solo training time. Flexing his newly expanded mana circuits, Isaac conjures a blazing fireball in his palm and winds up for a pitch. He launches the massive sphere of flames across the ornate room with absolute pinpoint precision. But our guy isn't just spamming basic attacks anymore. His glowing blue eyes narrow as he reveals the flashy inferno is nothing but a smokescreen. The real lethal payload is a razor-sharp ice crystal, perfectly hidden in the fireball's slipstream and ready to completely blindside whatever poor soul gets in its way. The blazing decoy hurtles straight toward an ornate mirror across the room. As the flames burn out, the razor-sharp payload is revealed, flying at breakneck speed. It slams into the glass, shattering the mirror into a million glittering pieces. Exhaling a breath, our boy checks his internal stats, hyped to realize that flatlining boss Nyers actually expanded his mana circuits from 4 to 5. But he knows he can't get complacent. He needs to master multicasting ASAP, because his W against the bandit boss was heavily carried by sheer luck. He remembers it clearly. Nyers had let his guard down, assuming his targets were just weak prey completely ignorant of the terrain. Isaac clenches his fist, refusing to sell himself short. He seized that opening and took the man's life with his own 2 hands. Exhausted from the intense training, our hero flops back onto his plush bed, his mind drifting to the heavy lore drop he received before. He had been warned about the enemies of House Gerda, and the chilling reality is that their entire build is perfectly optimized to slaughter mages. Closing his eyes, our guy knows the plot armor won't save him next time. Staring out at the starry night sky, he makes a silent vow to grind his power level to the absolute max to protect his family's legacy. Next morning his sleep was violently interrupted when the bedroom door flies open and a panicked servant screams for the young master. Startled, our boy bolts upright in bed as the nanny and Hans rush in, demanding he get up immediately. The nanny takes absolute command of the room, barking at Hans to fetch the young master's clothes on the double. Still trying to process the chaos, Isaac demands to know what the sudden rush is all about as she drops a wash bucket by his side. With a bright smile, she drops the ultimate bombshell. The master of the house has finally returned. The news hits our guy like a ton of bricks, leaving him completely paralyzed in shock while a servant scrubs his face clean. We can practically see his heart hammering against his ribs in sheer, unadulterated panic. Because outside the estate an imposing silver-haired figure rides toward the gates carrying a massive greatsword on his back. Count Gerda is home, and for our hero, the real final boss of this tutorial stage might have just walked through the front door. Once, long before any of this, our boy sat isolated in a dimly lit room, tallying the endless years of his past life on the wall. The 71-year-old scholar's quiet work was suddenly interrupted by the heavy creak of a door. He turned to find his father, Count Gerda, standing in the doorway, looking battered and carrying a heavy pack. The older man's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Stunned by the sight of his son, the Count let his belongings drop heavily to the floor. The 2 men stood facing each other in the gloom, the crushing weight of decades of confinement written all over Isaac's unkempt frame. In a quiet, heavy moment, the father draped a cloth over his shoulders and began to carefully cut away the overgrown hair. The steady snip of the scissors filled the silence as Isaac softly gave his consent. With a heavy heart, his father gently assured him that the end would be painless. Our hero just listened, his bright blue eyes entirely calm and accepting of his fate. The Count continued to meticulously groom his son, offering one final, tender act of paternal care. When asked if this was truly what he desired, Isaac didn't hesitate to firmly confirm his resolve. Leaning in, the old man pressed his forehead against his son's, sharing one last heartbreaking goodbye. He turned and walked out the heavy wooden door, promising to wait for Isaac at the very end of his journey. Left alone in the dim cell, our hero let his father's parting command echo in his mind, a final urge to leave all his worldly regrets behind. Back in the present, the scene shifts to the bright, sunlit grandeur of the estate's library. The imposing Count Gerda sits across from his 12-year-old son, noting that it's been a long time since their last face-to-face. Our boy respectfully acknowledges the patriarch, keeping his cool. But the Count isn't here for small talk, cutting straight to the chase about the recent incident over at Black Goose Village. He demands to know if Isaac really treated the sick kids, and Bro instantly deduces that Schiller must have snitched on his side quest. Playing the part of the innocent, modest child to perfection, Isaac shrugs the whole thing off as pure luck. He spins a flawless lie about stumbling across an old medical book on a peculiar pneumonia that just so happened to match the villager's symptoms. To his immense relief, the old man actually buys the excuse and pivots to asking about his physical health instead. The Count mistakenly credits some expensive doctor from Othen for keeping his condition stable, a claim that our hero internally scoffs at, knowing full well that Quack didn't do a damn thing. A heavy, slightly awkward silence settles over the sprawling library. Our boy finally breaks the ice, casually asking how things are going. The Count caught off guard when our boy brings up the border fortress of Winterband. When questioned about his sudden interest, Isaac plays the perfect heir, claiming it's his duty as a Gerda to serve there someday. His father paints a grim picture of the front line, conjuring a mental image of a bleak frozen hellscape of endless snow, hardened nights and relentless monsters. But there was one slight deviation from their usual grim routine, a pit stop at Burn City on the way back. The name instantly sets off alarm bells in Isaac's head, linking the location straight to the slave syndicate's underground sewer hideout. Puffing on his pipe, the old man casually mentions a rather troublesome incident that went down during their stay. He reveals that a lowly infantryman actually attacked a company commander, prompting our guy to assume the grunt was immediately executed for mutiny. But the patriarch drops a curveball. The victim actually requested a formal military tribunal instead of a swift execution. Our hero is totally baffled by this bizarre display of leniency, but before he can dig any deeper, the heavy doors swing wide open. An unfamiliar voice calls out from the doorway, crashing their little family bonding session. Two armored dudes rocking blue cloaks step into the room, instantly slapping on friendly smiles to greet the young master. The brown-haired knight shoots the kid a curious look, clearly wondering why he's crashing the boss's office. The count formally addresses the newcomers as Fickle and Randolph, then promptly tells Isaac to take a hike so the adults can talk business. Playing the part of the obedient son, our boy bows out and heads for the heavy wooden doors. But instead of actually leaving, he posts up right outside the frame to do some top-tier eavesdropping. Inside, Fickle is going full try-hard, aggressively demanding the mutineers' immediate execution to maintain military discipline. The Count isn't entirely sold on the sudden bloodlust and turns to Randolph for his take on the situation. Ever the stoic soldier, Randolph just gives a neutral non-answer, deferring entirely to the commander-in-chief's final call. That's when our guy overhears the smoking gun. Fickle snaps at his partner, asking how he can be so chill after the grunt literally sliced his ear off. Having scooped all the intel he needs, Isaac quietly dips down the hallway before he gets caught snooping. His galaxy brain is already working in overdrive, piecing together the puzzle of this bizarre military drama. Picturing the crests on their surcoats in his mind's eye, he confirms their identity. These guys are the Shield of the Kingdom, elite knights of the Winterband Fortress. Connecting the dots, our boy pictures the headband-wearing knight in his mind's eye. Randolph is absolutely the victim of that mutiny. Suddenly, frantic footsteps echo down the corridor as a black-suited servant sprints up behind him, gasping for the young master. Catching his breath, the panicked Bill begs Isaac to follow him immediately. Sweating bullets, he stresses that this is an absolute code red. The scene shifts to an exterior of the snowy castle courtyard remaining dead quiet, a stark contrast to the brewing storm indoors. Stopping in his tracks, our guy demands to know what the hell has the man so spooked. Glancing around nervously, the servant brings up the recent underground slave trade bust down in the sewers. He reveals a massive scandal. Apparently, certain VIPs took fat bribes to turn a blind eye to the syndicate's dirty work. Isaac doesn't beat around the bush, demanding names on the spot. The servant drops an absolute nuke, leaving our hero stunned. The corrupt backers are none other than the Knights of Winterband. But the nightmare doesn't end there. He reports that the corpse of one of the syndicate's bandits was just found dumped near the sewer entrance. The horrifying kicker, the body was gruesomely mutilated, with every single digit except the left pinky finger hacked clean off. Our boy isn't letting up, demanding the rest of the story as the terrified man frantically digs through his pockets. He produces a grisly piece of evidence. A freshly severed digit that leaves even Isaac wide-eyed. Bill remembers it clearly, waking up in a cold sweat to find those bloody warnings resting right on his own bed. The syndicate didn't stop at gruesome deliveries, sending a verbal threat straight through one of the staff. The message was a brutal ultimatum: cough up the kickbacks in 2 days or pay the ultimate price. The servant is absolutely losing his mind, convinced his own hand is next on the chopping block. Sweating bullets, he begs our guy for a lifeline, crying that this whole lethal mess is Isaac's fault for forcing his hand. But our hero is completely unfazed by the meltdown, coldly steering the conversation right back to the dead body. He cuts through the whining to ask the only question that matters: did anyone actually see the hit go down? In the servant's memory of the dark streets, a witness claimed a cloaked figure materialized from the shadows, slashing the victim down in a single blinding flash of a sword. The strike was so fast, the only detail the bystander caught was a heavy layer of bandages wrapped around the assassin's head. And now here he stands. Isaac goes dead silent as the final damning puzzle piece clicks perfectly into place. Our boy simply nods, leaving the black-suited servant absolutely floored by his lack of panic. Without missing a beat, the young master turns on his heel. He tosses a casual glance over his shoulder, promising the trembling man that he won't be dying today. A few days ago, Count Gerda was escorting the 2 tribunal-bound knights through the gates of Burn City. While passing through, those supposed paragons of justice took a detour into the sewers to butcher a local bandit. But this wasn't some random act of violence. The victim was the very same bandaged bandit they had hired, permanently silenced to tie up loose ends. Striding down the hall, our guy's expression hardens into absolute ice-cold fury. A vision of the Winterband crest flashes in his mind, not as a noble shield of the kingdom, but as a festering disease begging to be eradicated. With a new target locked in, our hero marches straight up to the heavy iron-reinforced doors of the estate's dungeon. The station dungeon guard practically jumps out of his boots, stammering to ask what business the young master has down here. Bro cuts right to the chase, demanding to see the death row prisoner locked up for mutiny. Deep inside the pitch-black cell, a heavily chained man sits waiting in the shadows. Unfazed by the gloom, our guy firmly insists he isn't leaving until he sees the condemned man face to face. Slowly the chains rattle as the dark-haired prisoner lifts his head, revealing a battered face and a single piercing amber eye glaring back from the dark. And he's about to get one hell of an unexpected visitor. Our boy descends into the dungeon's gloom, hunting for a specific death row inmate to verify a massive hunch. Are the Knights of Winterband secretly in bed with the syndicate boss Nyers? Standing before the heavy iron bars, Isaac spots the chained prisoner who caught a treason charge against those very knights, and wastes no time asking if he recognizes the syndicate's name. Our guy casually drops the rumor that the group is running a human trafficking ring, watching the inmate closely for any sign of a reaction. The heavy chains rattle as the captive's hands violently flinch at the dark accusation. But the dark-haired man quickly locks his expression down, offering nothing but a cold golden-eyed glare. Staring right back, our hero narrows his eyes, a nagging sense of familiarity suddenly tugging at his memories. Isaac presses the issue, demanding to know the truth about the prisoner's former commander, only to be met with absolute dead air. The inmate remains a total stone wall, refusing to give up a single syllable. Then heavy boots scrape against the stone floor as the captive finally steps out of the shadows, breaking his vow of silence. The chained man lunges forward to fiercely grip the iron bars, the sudden burst of aggression making Isaac jump back. Getting right in his face, the prisoner spits out a venomous denial, swearing he doesn't know a damn thing about it. Unfazed, our guy sees right through the tough guy act, his piercing blue eyes locking on to analyze every micro-expression. Isaac tilts his head, calmly asking the captive for a name. Claiming to be just a nobody, the prisoner says he goes by Carlson, but our boy just lets out a knowing smirk. Our hero calls out the blatant lie, dropping the guy's real name like a bomb, Kyle. The captive's golden eye blows wide open in pure, unadulterated shock. His chained feet physically recoil, scraping against the damp stone. Staring at our boy, Kyle demands to know how on earth he figured that out. Our boy remembers it clearly. Decades ago, he first learned that name as the kingdom's civil war erupted in a blaze of hellfire. It all started with a royal succession ceremony meant to crown a new king. The second prince, bitter over losing the throne, had other plans. Selling the kingdom out to the empire, the royal traitor turned the sacred ceremony into an absolute bloodbath. With the nation subjugated, furious citizens raised their torches in the dark, igniting a massive rebellion. Back in the present, our guy lays out the heavy truth. This bruised prisoner trying to pass as Carlson is the legendary leader of that very rebel army, leaving Kyle stammering in disbelief. Our boy casually leans against the bars and brushes off the question, in his mind claiming he just read about the guy in a book. He recalls a book named Chronicles of Villains, a bestseller from his past life that featured a highly popular chapter dedicated entirely to this battered prisoner. The text hyped the rebel up as an absolute prodigy, a generational talent destined to become the continent's seventh swordmaster. Staring down the chained man in the flesh, our hero has to admit the hype is completely real. He can literally see the immense glowing aura of mana radiating from Kyle's chest, a testament to an absolutely insane grind set. A nervous gulp escapes our guy as he realizes just how terrifyingly overpowered this dude will be once his stats fully max out. This monster of a talent managed to cheat his own execution to lead the uprising, but right now, the present-day Kyle furiously demands to know where the team got this highly classified intel. But Isaac isn't done dropping nukes, casually telling the prisoner to save his surprise because he also knows Kyle is the son of Cation. That name hits like a freight train, leaving the chained warrior visibly rattled that his deepest secret is out in the open. Desperate, Kyle demands to know who he's dealing with, only for our boy to feign offense that a knight doesn't recognize the eldest son of House Gerda. The prisoner asks if this noble is here to assassinate him, but Isaac just laughs off the main character syndrome, asking why he'd care about the son of a mercenary from a neighboring republic. He twists the knife by calling him a bastard who vanished off the map over a decade ago, earning a downright murderous glare from the future rebel king. Kyle demands to know if he's actually speaking to the young master, but our guy just brushes the question aside, making it clear he's the one running this interrogation. He drops a massive bombshell instead, demanding to know why the company commanders of Winterband are mixed up in the slave trade, making the hardened warrior physically flinch. The candlelight flickers as Kyle stews in the dark, finally admitting that if this kid really is a noble. Stepping forward, his chains dragging across the stone, Kyle decides that's all the more reason to cooperate. But our hero isn't done dismantling him, casually pointing out the glaring flaw in the knight's loyalty. His superiors are absolutely going to pin all of Nayar's dirty work on him. The reality of the situation hits Kyle like a sack of bricks, sending him slumping to the floor in defeat as Isaac spells out his inevitable future as a wanted criminal. With a piercing glare, Isaac delivers the final crushing blow, telling him that if he takes the fall, his grand quest for revenge ends before it even begins. The future rebel king just stares up in stunned silence, completely gutted now that his core motivation has been dragged out into the open. Letting out a slow breath, our boy realizes that unlike Bill, this guy is way too sharp to just be manipulated into doing his dirty work. Pivoting without missing a beat, Isaac turns his back on the cell, his mind already calculating a new angle. If he can't use Kyle as a blunt instrument, he's just going to have to step up and draw his enemies out of the woodwork himself. The heavy silence of the dungeon settles back in, broken only by the slow, rhythmic drip of water echoing off the damp stone. Right on cue, Two heavily cloaked figures step out of the shadows, their boots echoing down the dimly lit dungeon corridor. The intruder pauses, his eyes scanning the gloom as he realizes Boss Nayer's usual muscle is completely missing in action. His pale companion points a gloved finger ahead, spotting something even more alarming. The heavy iron cages meant to hold their freshly caught merchandise are sitting wide open and completely empty. Continuing their march, the man mutters about Nayers suddenly holding out on their kickbacks and demanding a face-to-face meeting. He grabs a heavy iron door handle, wondering out loud if the arrogant syndicate boss is planning to scrap their entire arrangement. But the second he pulls the door open, the bearded intruder violently flinches, instantly drawing his sword at the sight waiting inside. Instead of a hardened criminal mastermind, they are greeted by a terrified, sweat-drenched face stammering out a polite invitation. A nervous servant stuffed into a formal black suit and bow tie awkwardly holds the heavy door open, shaking like a leaf. The bearded intruder freezes in his tracks, utterly bewildered as to why someone in this dungeon is dressed up like a high-society butler. He quickly scans the trembling man's torso, confirming that the terrified greeter isn't packing any hidden weapons. Exchanging a silent, cautious glance with his pale partner, the swordsman finally lowers his guard and decides to step into the room. The two cloaked swordsmen step through the stone archway, hands hovering near their hilts just in case things go sideways. The bearded intruder peers into the gloom, his eyes locking onto the solitary occupant waiting for them in the dark. Sitting at the far end of a wooden table is a shadowy silhouette, arms crossed and radiating pure final boss energy under the dim candlelight. Smirking like he already owns the place, the bearded swordsman casually asks if this guy is the syndicate's new boss, mocking his absolute audacity for calling them out here without a proper greeting. The mysterious figure just lets the heavy silence drag out, completely unbothered by the threat. But when the figure finally breaks the silence to ask a single question, the pitch of the voice catches both grown men completely off guard. The bearded thug realizes he's listening to a literal child, just as the pint-sized shadow stands up from the table, demanding to know exactly why they did it. The lone candle flickers violently, casting an eerie, oppressive shadow that feels way too big for a kid. Suddenly, the pale-skinned intruder goes completely white, cold sweat instantly drenching his face as the realization hits him like a freight train. Without a single second of hesitation, the pale swordsman drops hard to one knee, leaving his bearded partner staring down at him in utter confusion. Panic bleeding into his voice, the terrified man screams at his partner to hit the floor and kneel. The bearded intruder staggers back, completely lost as his groveling partner desperately asks if he has any idea who they are actually looking at. Stepping out of the shadows and into the candlelight, the small figure offers a chillingly polite welcome. The flickering glow finally catches that signature silver hair as our boy calmly invites the two intruders to join him for a cup of tea. Dropping their actual names, Sir Fickle and Sir Randolph. Isaac watches the bearded knight's jaw hit the floor as the man stammers out a single terrified realization. He's staring dead at young Master Isaac. Days ago, the snowy wind howled outside a secluded cabin. Inside, a heavy sack of coins jingled as it was dumped onto a wooden table. Sir Fickle smirked, praising the bandit boss Nayers for his absolute knack for extorting cash. Sir Randolph inspected a gold coin, just relieved they'd finally have enough for food and firewood. Fickle greedily added that they could even replace their rusty swords and line their own pockets. The two eagerly split the dirty money between them. But their little celebration was cut short by the heavy crunch of a boot at the doorway. A stern voice commanded them to stop, freezing the two knights in their tracks. Standing in the doorway was a Kyle, glaring daggers at his subordinates. Fickle flinched, instinctively pulling the sack of coins closer. The future rebel leader furiously demanded to know what on earth they thought they were doing. Back in the present, a steaming cup of tea sits on the dungeon table as the story wraps up. Isaac calmly processes their confession, acknowledging that even traitors have their reasons. A vision of his father, Count Gerda, flashes in his mind's eye. The man is the unyielding shield of the North, but he completely lacks the flexibility to bend when needed. Our boy deduces the rest. These knights respected the Count, but they couldn't just stand by and watch their own soldiers freeze to death. Pushed to the brink, they resorted to shaking down the local bandits just to cover the army's crippling supply shortages. Fickle nods eagerly, a wave of relief washing over him now that the young master finally understands their noble sacrifices. But my guy just crosses his arms, his expression turning to stone as he prepares to deliver his verdict. Without missing a single beat, he sentences both Fickle and Randolph to death. He coldly reminds them that his father's judgment would be exactly the same, and they will be facing a military tribunal for their crimes. Absolute disbelief shatters the room as Fickle slams his hands down on the table, screaming at the young master in sheer frustration. The knight bitterly spits that a privileged brat like Isaac could never comprehend their grim reality. He remembers it clearly. His men froze in the snow, losing limbs to frostbite and dying gruesome deaths from dull blades. Fickle demands to know if Isaac has ever faced such horrors, but our hero just stares back with dead eyes and gives a blunt one-word answer: no. Our boy rises from his chair, coldly brushing off the tragic backstory as just another convenient excuse. He cuts right to the chase, demanding to know why their supposedly noble cause suddenly required kidnapping innocent civilians. Isaac glares daggers at the bearded knight, asking if Fickle really expects him to buy that he didn't cross the exact same lines as the bandits. Fickle's eyes blow wide in sheer panic as his hypocrisy is laid completely bare. The traitor clenches his fists, growling that he never should have expected a sheltered brat to understand the weight of the real world. He barks at a sweating Randolph to get off his knees, reminding his partner that they are the swords of House Gerda. With a heavy metallic scrape, Fickle draws his blade, trying to convince himself this treason is strictly for the good of the territory. The bearded knight levels the heavy steel right at our hero, declaring he's prepared to cut down anything in his path. But Fickle pushes the mutiny further, screaming at his comrade to look at the bigger picture. He fiercely rationalizes that the Count still has another perfectly good heir in Jonas, making it a favor to the family to eliminate a ticking time bomb like Isaac. Unfazed, our guy doesn't even blink at the murderous threat. Lethal intent takes over as Fickle grips his hilt, channeling his mana until a blinding blue aura flares to life around the blade. The sheer force of the knight's mana whips the air into a violent frenzy around his boots. Our boy just watches the light show with mild amusement, letting out a soft, unimpressed "oh-ho." Fully enveloped in his blazing blue aura, Fickle locks in, ready to strike the young master down. Off to the side, Randolph watches in a cold sweat, wondering how things spiraled so far out of control. Randolph remembers how, long before any of this, he and Fickle used to laugh together, back when their cause actually felt just. His grip on his sword falters as heavy doubt creeps into his mind. As Fickle lunges forward to execute the young master, Randolph's conscience finally snaps. Randolph just presses his lips together, not moving a single inch. Just then Randolph called Fickle. He remembered that Fickle one told him, if he was the sword, Randolph was the shield. But the rebel leader had also left them with a chilling warning. He explained that a blade capable of cutting through anything without breaking was a true masterpiece. But the moment that flawless masterpiece gained a will of its own, Kyle warned that it became nothing more than a demonic blade. Back in the present, Randolph snaps out of the memory and steps heavily into Fickle's warpath. With a deafening clash of steel, the pale knight intercepts the lethal strike, shielding our boy from the blow. Sparks fly as the two knights lock blades, with Randolph bitterly admitting he only understood Kyle's warning after it was too late. Sweating under the immense pressure, he screams at Fickle that the rebel leader was right all along. Fickle furiously pushes back against the blade, threatening to take his comrade's head clean off if he doesn't get out of the way. Refusing to yield, Randolph holds his ground, grimly accepting that this deadly standoff might just be his karma. As their weapons grind together in a shower of sparks, the pale knight finally voices the dark truth he's been hiding. Pushing against the stalemate, he looks his old partner dead in the eye and brings up the extorted money. He flat out accuses Fickle of pocketing the dirty cash for himself, instead of using it to fund their territory. The bearded knight gasps, completely caught off guard and visibly shaken by the sudden accusation. Before Sir Fickle can even process the betrayal, Randolph's blade tears through the air, cutting his former comrade down in a single brutal strike. Blood splatters against the stone as the bearded knight collapses, dead before he even hits the floor. Sometime later, our boy just sits there, completely unbothered by the sudden execution, and calmly notes that this deep-seated corruption is exactly why Kyle drew his sword against them in the first place. Lowering his blood-stained weapon, Sir Randolph confesses that when Kyle first uncovered their little embezzlement scheme, the knights fully intended to silence him for good. Isaac smirks, effortlessly pointing out the one massive flaw in that master plan. They got absolutely washed. The pale knight solemnly agrees, admitting that the rebel leader could have easily slaughtered them both without breaking a sweat. Randolph remembers how Kyle had simply sliced off his ear as a permanent warning, telling the corrupt knight to open his ears to the truth before voluntarily turning himself in. Our hero leans forward, questioning if Randolph stopped Kyle's summary execution out of some newfound sense of genuine guilt. The knight falls dead silent, completely unable to meet the young master's piercing gaze. His boots literally tremble against the stone floor as the crushing weight of his sins finally catches up to him. Gripping his hands nervously behind his back, Randolph drops the noble act and asks what would happen to family if words will get out. Our guy doesn't offer a single ounce of pity, coldly replying that Randolph already knows exactly what happens to traitors in this world. As Bill nervously shifts in the background clutching his bloody sack, Randolph braces himself for the absolute worst. But instead of handing down a death sentence, a wicked, calculating smile creeps across our boy's face. He calls out the pale knight's name, snapping the sweating man back to attention. Still seated like a boss in the shadows, Isaac offers a sinister deal, asking if Randolph has any intention of paying for his sins through alternative means. The bandaged knight stares in absolute shock as our boy lays out the master plan. Rewind to shortly after the dungeon confrontation, where the official story got a massive rewrite. The record now claimed Randolph and Sir Fickle only started trading with the syndicate to keep their company supplied. But according to this shiny new narrative, Fickle was the one blinded by greed, diving headfirst into the slave trade and targeting the estate's maids. And when his criminal empire started crumbling, The bearded traitor supposedly took our guy hostage, holding a blade to his throat to sell him off overseas. But right as the fatal blow was about to land, the loyal Sir Randolph swooped in, disarming his corrupt comrade and knocking him to the dirt to save his lord. It was a beautiful tale of heroism, ending with Fickle swinging from the gallows, taking the fall for every single one of their shared sins. Down in the town square, the locals gathered to watch the traitor hang, completely oblivious to the fabricated truth. Hidden beneath a dark hood in the crowd, Randolph could only clench his jaw in silent bitter frustration. He slipped away from the execution, his loyalty now permanently bought and paid for in blood. Back in the present, our hero sits across from Count Gerda in the estate's grand study, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Sipping his tea, the young master knows that even if those knights were corrupted by greed, the financial desperation driving their territory into the ground is all too real. The harsh reality is that House Gerda is practically running on fumes and a couple of sad-looking potatoes. For holding the line at the frozen, monster-infested northern border, the royal family throws them an annual shield tax to keep the lights on. But lately that crucial royal paycheck has been getting slashed to the bone. Count Gerda knows all too well that they are politically gagged, unable to utter a single complaint, let alone try to fill their own coffers. Lighting his pipe, the patriarch sits in silence, burdened by the dark shadow hanging over their bloodline, the legacy of a mad mage who once burned the royal capital to ash. Once, long before any of this, their legendary ancestor Zeke von Gerda unleashed absolute hell, reducing the great city to a sea of raging flames. When the kingdom's own forces proved completely useless against his apocalyptic power, the kneeling king was forced to beg the emperor for salvation, ending with Zeke's execution by imperial blades. That was then. Now our hero calmly sips his tea, fully aware that Zeke's catastrophic stunt turned the entire kingdom into a permanent vassal state. Spared from total extermination by a razor-thin margin, his family now endures a bitter exile, stripped of their ducal title and banished to freeze in this barren wasteland. Setting his cup down with a sharp clink, he understands the trap they are in. If House Gerda even tries to scrape together a war chest, the crown will immediately cry treason. In the mind's eye, a grim vision of slaughtered soldiers bleeding out in the snow serves as a brutal reminder that starving in the cold has always been the safest political play to avoid another massacre. But as he lowers his gaze, our guy starts calculating a dangerously radical alternative to break the cycle. Leaning in, our boy challenges the very foundation of their exile, suggesting that the crown's supposed wrath might just be a hasty assumption. The older man freezes, completely taken aback by his son's absolute audacity. When his father questions if the royals would really just let them stockpile gold, Isaac lays out the brutal truth. The kingdom's treasury is bleeding dry, and their meager subsidies are only going to shrink. Our hero drops the hammer. If House Gerda suddenly declared self-reliance and stopped draining the royal coffers, the crown wouldn't see it as treason. They'd be weeping tears of utter relief. The real issue isn't that they aren't allowed to build wealth, our guy explains, it's just that they haven't figured out how. Our boy further points out the grim reality check, reminding them that they are trapped on dead soil and surrounded by enemies. Staring down at the table, the Count concedes that his son's political read is entirely spot on. But theory doesn't put food on the table, and the older man leans in hard, demanding a concrete solution to their geographical nightmare. He stares the teen down, waiting to see if this is just empty talk or if his boy actually has a master plan. Without missing a beat, our guy drops a bombshell that could start a holy war. They have to completely sever ties with the old church. He argues that as long as they are chained to a doctrine that glorifies suffering and poverty, House Gerda will never see a single gold coin. The Count immediately sweats the sheer scale of the heresy, warning that the Vatican isn't just going to sit back and let them walk away. Our boy clenches his fist, fully acknowledging the political suicide of his pitch, which is exactly why they need an ironclad justification. Flashing a dangerously confident smirk, the teen drops the mic. He already has a master plan to manufacture that exact excuse, leaving his father absolutely speechless. A little later, Count Gerda sits in his study, nursing a cup of tea and asking his aide Schiller for a reality check. The older man stares into his cup, genuinely struggling to believe that a 5D chess move this sophisticated actually came from his son's head. Schiller is just as mind-blown, pointing out that Isaac hasn't even had a proper tutor thanks to his lifelong struggle with explosive mana. Unable to just sit there with this revelation, the Count abruptly pushes himself up from the sofa. He steps over to the window, silently watching his son stroll through the courtyard below alongside Calson. Down in the yard, our guy is already breaking down the logistics of the massive heresy he just set in motion. Up above, his father watches him with a heavy gaze, completely lost in thought. He taps his fingers rhythmically against the pane, the gears turning in his head as he reevaluates everything he knows about his heir. Schiller waits in respectful silence, giving his master space to process the sheer scale of the proposal. The grand room stays perfectly quiet, the Count staring out at the silver-haired teen who might just be the terrifying genius House Gerda desperately needs. A few days later, the comic cuts to a bleak windswept night sky. The heavy clatter of wooden wheels breaks the silence as a solitary carriage rumbles down a dirt path. It rolls right up to an isolated stone church miles south of Burn City. The horses draw to a halt, greeted by a lone silhouette waiting in the gloom. A hooded figure steps out from the shadows, raising a lantern to inspect the arrivals. He initiates a deeply unsettling password exchange, demanding they kiss the entrails of the black calf. The man in the wide-brimmed hat driving the carriage just stares back in silence for a tense second. Then he delivers the grim countersign right on cue. The hooded contact gives a slow, satisfied nod. He orders the drivers to bring forth their gift, and the heavy carriage door swings open. Two cloaked guards drag out their cargo. A silver-haired teen bound tight in thick ropes and heavily gagged. A rough hand shoves our guy forward into the cold night air. The hooded contact asks for confirmation that this is the promised sacrifice, earning an immediate annoyed scoff from the head kidnapper. But the cultist isn't taking any chances, raising his lantern to get a good look at our boy's face. The flickering light illuminates the cultist's horribly burned visage as the scarred man flashes a sinister smile, promising a hefty payout if the goods are authentic. Through it all, our guy stays dead silent, his eyes completely hidden beneath his messy silver bangs. Satisfied with the inspection, the scarred fanatic calls out to the church, demanding the true gift be brought forth. The heavy wooden doors groan open as he declares that the goddess of fire will gladly accept this offering. The kidnappers hold their breath as slow, heavy footsteps echo from the dark interior. An elderly woman with a cane steps onto the threshold, her voice a raspy echo of the cult's blind devotion. She gestures for the scarred man to follow her inside to collect his prize. The man in the wide-brimmed hat watches them disappear into the gloom, letting out a massive sigh of relief. Turn our its and he shivers in the freezing night air, muttering curses under his breath at the absolute creeps he just did business with. Deciding he doesn't want to stick around to find out what a promised sacrifice actually entails, he immediately signals his crew to pack it up and bail. And two hooded figure guarding our boy none other than Kyle and Randolph. A lantern cuts through the pitch-black descent as a voice instructs them to follow. The hooded figures guide their captive down the wide stone steps. A heavy hand rests on our boy's back, pushing him deeper into the abyss. As the plan goes smoothly, Kyle look at our boy. Rewind to a few days ago, to see how the rebel leader ended up playing bodyguard. Sitting on a sunlit balcony, Kyle confirmed that Randolph and Fickle's embezzlement was the official cover story for his release. Isaac calmly added that as punishment for his insubordination, Kyle had been stripped of his platoon leader rank. Our hero feigned surprise at Kyle's former status, met only with a stony silence. Kyle paused, his teacup hovering near his lips. Isaac casually mentioned that the tea they were drinking was a specialty from Kyle's homeland, the Republic. The rebel leader processed the subtle flecks of information. Setting his cup down with a clink, Kyle cut to the chase, asking why our guy didn't just report him. He knew the young master was fully aware his real name wasn't Carlson. Our boy flashed a calculating smile, casually admitting he kept the secret because turning the rebel in would make him completely useless. A nervous drop of sweat rolled down Kyle's face as he tried to read the absolute enigma sitting across from him. Isaac told him to stop playing guessing games and stay focused on his true objective, causing the older man to visibly flinch. Leaning in, our boy dropped a massive bombshell. He knew Kyle was plotting to assassinate the greedy noble who massacred his family. He even named the target, Viscount Klaus von Bottmer, leaving the legendary rebel absolutely stunned. Gripping the table, Kyle demanded to know why this kid wasn't trying to stop him, to which my guy simply asked why he would ever do that. The swordsman pointed out the obvious political nightmare, reminding him that he was a foreigner plotting to murder a high-ranking noble of the kingdom. But the young master had his own agenda, revealing that he needed a masterpiece sword with a will of its own. Kyle could only listen in sheer disbelief as the 5D chess pieces finally fell into place. Isaac sealed the deal right then and there, promising to help Kyle secure his bloody revenge if the swordsman helped him claim the blade. Sometime later, the bustling brick-lined streets of Burn City are a stark contrast to that quiet balcony. Suddenly, a frantic voice cuts through the city noise, demanding everyone's undivided attention. A bald priest of the old church stands flanked by heavily armored knights, whipping the locals into an absolute frenzy over wild rumors of black magic and flesh-eating cultists. As a nondescript carriage rattles past the congregation, the holy man urges the masses to rely on salvation rather than their supposedly useless local lord. Inside that very carriage, Kyle pulls back the curtain, clocking the rabble-rousers outside as absolute zealots. Sitting next to him, a heavily bandaged Sir Randolph scoffs at the sheer audacity, pointing out that the church happily pockets a tenth of House Gerda's income while publicly dragging their name through the mud. But our boy, resting across from them with his eyes shut, tells his new squad to drop the church politics, since that's not exactly on today's itinerary. Randolph is sweating bullets, nervously asking if the young master is seriously going through with this suicidal plan to offer himself up as a human sacrifice. Isaac casually explains that these cultists are massive clout chasers who crave infamy, making his high-profile noble status the ultimate bait. Kyle stays completely silent, letting Randolph do all the fretting about the unknown horrors waiting for them in the enemy's den. Picturing the priest's gruesome warnings of cannibalism in his mind, the pale knight questions if this insane gamble is actually worth getting eaten alive. Completely unbothered, our guy reminds his panicking minion of his working theory. The old church is secretly the one funding this deranged sect in the first place. To prove his point, he brings up the late bandit boss Nyers, deducing that the hulking brute was likely a card-carrying cultist himself. Kyle nods along, pointing out that with all the black magic and casual cannibalism on the syndicate's resume, it'd honestly be a plot hole if Nyers wasn't in the cult. Pivoting the interrogation, our boy asks Randolph to double-check a highly specific detail about the silver coins the bandit boss used to pay him off. A pristine coin flashes in his mind's eye as the teen points out that those weren't just standard chump change. They were premium, high-quality mints stamped straight from the royal family. The math finally clicks for the bandaged knight, his eyes going wide as he realizes a two-bit street thug shouldn't have access to top-tier royal currency. Kyle admits that definitely points to the Vatican's bottomless pockets, but he's still skeptical if it's the smoking gun they need to prove a direct connection. Staring out the carriage window, our hero shoots back a cold glare, asking if the future swordmaster is just huffing copium to avoid facing the ugly truth. With a heavy sigh, Isaac begins to recount the grim, blood-soaked history of the Goethe territory. Abstract blood-red imagery bleeds into his thoughts as he describes how a deranged cult known as the Dark Sect started eating away at his family's domain from the inside out. Visions of bloody axes and unholy magic circles flash by as he details the bizarre murders and occult rituals that left the citizens of Burned City completely paralyzed with terror. And the absolute biggest winner of all this widespread panic, the old church. The priests swooping in to play the hero, hunting down the fanatics and staging brutal fiery executions right in the public square. The terrified townsfolk watch the carnage with disturbing brainwashed smiles, viewing the horrific burnings as divine mercy. A PR masterclass that skyrocketed the church's absolute power. In his memories of years ago, behind closed doors, the leaders of House Goethe were absolutely furious, slamming their fists on the council desks in pure outrage. The so-called holy men began making outrageous demands, extorting double the usual tithes and trying to conscript knights while Winterband was already bleeding out in a defensive war. As a direct result of this extortion, the territory suffered severe food shortages and catastrophic military defeats that nearly broke the family. That's why our boy declares that severing ties with the church isn't just a quick cash grab. It's the only way to protect his family's legacy, which brings this whole master plan to its current destination, an isolated, run-down stone church sitting dead quiet under the cover of night. The eerie, rhythmic tapping of a wooden cane echoes up the stone steps. An elderly cultist leads the disguised group forward, recounting the grim history of how 3 so-called saints miraculously survived when the old church burned this very building to the ground. Bill, hiding his face under a wide-brimmed hat, listens to her religious rambling and internally curses about how incredibly annoying this sermon is. Oblivious to his irritation, the old woman keeps preaching, spinning some twisted philosophy about how a soul dwells deep within the human body. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, she finally reveals the cult's grotesque path to eternity. Both Bill and Sir Randolph freeze in absolute horror as she casually explains that by consuming human flesh, they absorb the victim's intellect, pain, and vitality. Inside the dimly lit blood-red hall, shadowy figures are hunched over their gruesome meals, the sickening wet sound of crunching bones filling the heavy air. Bill and Sir Randolph recoil in absolute disgust, completely horrified by the nightmare unfolding in front of them. Slamming her cane against the stone floor, the elderly cultist proudly announces that the prophesied sacrifice has finally arrived. The blood-smeared fanatics look up from their sickening meal as she commands them to consume the noble soul. Flashing a manic, terrifying grin, she hypes up the offering, claiming this single vessel possesses wisdom, purity, and absolute nobility. To complete the grim ritual, she orders her flock to devour the escorts as well. But having heard enough of this psychotic nonsense, Bill ruthlessly kicks the old woman straight to the ground. Adjusting his wide-brimmed hat, Bill loudly complains to his young master about how long they had to play along with this charade. Standing right between his 2 disguised bodyguards, the supposedly helpless, bound and gagged Isaac finally drops the act. Our boy casually pulls down his gag, letting out a heavy sigh of relief now that the infiltration phase is officially over. Kyle and Randolph draw their swords in perfect unison, while our guy lays down the ground rules: only strike down the ones who attack. The cannibal cultists violently flinch, suddenly realizing their easy midnight snack has just turned into a heavily armed ambush. With his glowing blue eyes locked dead onto the fanatics, our hero coldly reminds his men of their true objective, ready to purge this entire church from the ground up. Randolph stands over the elderly cult leader as she screams her lungs out, cursing them for abandoning her twisted goddess. But before she can even finish casting her little hex, the swordsman brutally kicks her right across the face. Stepping over her unconscious body like it's absolutely nothing, he draws his glowing blade and drops a bone-chilling ultimatum. Staring down the remaining bleeding fanatics, he promises to end their run before they even have time to process the pain. Turns out, The threat of instant deletion is all the motivation they need to spring right back to their feet. The terrified cultists completely lose their minds, scrambling over each other in a desperate panic to get out of aggro range. Their frantic footsteps quickly fade out as they disappear through the dark stone archway. Our boy calmly tells his squad to let the trash run, prioritizing a full sweep of the area instead. Sir Randolph scoffs at the fleeing rabble, genuinely baffled that the bandit boss Nyers was ever obsessed with such pathetic losers. Kyle kneels back down beside the unconscious cult leader, nudging her to see if she can still stand. The old crone suddenly jolts awake, trembling violently and weakly calling out for her husband. Completely disoriented and terrified out of her mind, she begs the men not to hit her, having zero clue where she even is. Bill rolls his eyes, completely exasperated that the old hag seems to have lost her marbles. But then she cowers on the floor, desperately pleading for mercy from someone she calls the subdeacon. Catching the clue, our boy leans in with a gentle smile and softly asks for her address. A short time later, the squad arrives at a modest wooden house tucked away in the slums south of Burn City, and what they find inside leaves the three grown men completely stunned. Hidden away in the attic is a massive wooden chest absolutely overflowing with silver coins. As the elderly cultist snoozes peacefully in her bed downstairs, the guys marvel at the sheer absurdity of the stash. Sir Randolph slaps Bill's greedy hand away from the loot, while Kyle questioning if this cash really belongs to the royal family. Isaac gives a dead serious nod. There's absolutely no mistaking the official seal of the royal mint stamped right on the silver. Just as they realize they've secured the smoking gun connecting the cult to the old church, a sudden knock echoes from downstairs. Our hero peers down the stairs from the attic as the front door creaks open. An older, balding man steps through the threshold, casually calling out to check on the elderly woman. Our boy's eyes go wide with absolute shock. He instantly recognizes the intruder's unmistakable robes. It's a literal priest of the old church. The holy man immediately drops the pleasantries, ominously asking the old woman if their little ritual was a success. Sitting up in bed, the crone stammers and hesitates, her mind still completely fractured. Then, flashing a wide bloodshot eye, she suddenly starts rambling about demons. She shrieks that demonic forces completely trampled their altar and slaughtered the entire flock of believers. The clergyman is caught completely off guard, demanding a full incident report on what exact demons she's talking about. Gasping for air, the terrified woman finally addresses him by his official title, subdeacon. But just as fast, her brain completely shifts gears and she breaks down sobbing that her husband is beating her to death, begging the priest for salvation. Realizing her mental hard drive just crashed into another senile episode, the subdeacon sighs in utter annoyance. But before he can write her off entirely, a sudden creak from the floorboards above makes him whip around in alarm. He glares up at the dark cobweb-covered ceiling, sensing a presence. The priest gathers glowing magical energy in his palm, muttering about a rat hiding in the attic. Deciding the senile old hag has outlived her usefulness, he resolves to silence her before their dirty little secret leaks out. He ignites a blazing sphere of fire magic, ready to reduce the house, the hidden wealth and the woman to absolute ashes. But before he can unleash the flames, a cryptic voice echoes from the shadows, mocking how demons always hide within the light. In a flash, Kyle materializes right behind the priest, pressing cold steel flush against his throat. Sweating bullets, the terrified subdeacon stammers out a desperate threat, warning that the Vatican won't just stand by if he's murdered. Those empty threats are cut short by the sound of footsteps casually strolling down the wooden stairs. A voice greets him by his full title, Subdeacon Silvio. Our boy steps into the candlelight, offering a polite, chilling smile to the absolutely horrified clergyman. Sometime later, the scene cuts to a secluded stone church nestled deep in the forest, and the subdeacon finds himself securely lashed to a wooden chair with thick ropes, completely at their mercy. Sweating bullets and weeping like a baby, the broken clergyman spills the beans. The old church was desperate to expand its grip over Gerda territory. He admits that to justify their holy crusade, his superior ordered them to manufacture a villain. Silvio confesses to fabricating a twisted new doctrine, weaponizing the desperate poor into a violent mob. The horrifying truth drops like an anvil. This entire cannibalistic death cult was a false flag operation orchestrated by the Vatican itself. Kyle and Sir Randolph listen in absolute disgust, turning to our hero to ask how he plans to use this sickening intel. The young master stands silently in the dim light, his strategic mind already calculating the endgame. He coolly declares that tomorrow, they will drag this pathetic excuse for a holy man straight to the cathedral to force some aggressive negotiations. But the captive actually has the nerve to scoff, warning them that his superior will rain hellfire down on Count Gerda for this little kidnapping stunt. Our guy calmly cuts off the rant, smoothly informing the priest that his father had nothing to do with this. He orchestrated the entire trap himself. The subdeacon completely freezes, his brain blue screening as he processes the fact that a literal teenager just dismantled his life's work. Staring down his captive, Isaac coldly asserts that if the church wants payback, they'll have to come directly for his head. Utterly outplayed and outclassed, the broken priest slumps forward in his chair, finally realizing he's already lost. Outside, a crescent moon hangs quietly in the starry night sky. Back inside the stone chamber, the captive priest stews in the heavy flickering silence. His legs tremble uncontrollably, boots tapping anxiously against the base of his chair. The sheer disbelief claws at him, as he agonizes over how his meticulously crafted scheme just went up in smoke overnight. But what truly shatters his ego is the realization that his entire empire was toppled by a mere teenager. Groaning against the tight ropes digging into his torso, that crushing despair slowly ferments back into pure spiteful anger. Letting out a dark broken chuckle, Silvio spitefully brands his captors as the spawn of uncultured savages. Staring daggers at the heavy iron-studded door, he curses our hero to face the absolute wrath of divine judgment. Clinging to his last shred of authority, he fanatically promises that his superior will step in to personally rectify this humiliation. Eyes wide and completely crazed, the subdeacon vows that his superior will rain severe punishment down upon every single one of them. But right in the middle of his unhinged rant, a sickening squelch echoes through the room, snapping his eye wide open in pure shock. Looking down in absolute confusion, blood spills from his mouth as he realizes a massive wooden stake has just been violently driven straight through his chest. The subdeacon violently chokes on his own blood, slumping forward as a shadowy figure stands over his ruined body. The cloaked assassin doesn't flinch, watching the priest bleed out in complete chilling silence. With the loose end permanently taken care of, the killer simply turns to walk away. Reaching the doorway, a dark-haired boy holding a lantern innocently asks if they're already heading out. Our guy steps right out of the shadows, lantern in hand, calmly noting what an absolute shame it is that they had to reunite under such messy circumstances. The assassin snaps his head back in pure panic, revealing himself to be none other than Bishop Livonius, caught red-handed by the exact teenager he thought he was playing.